The epic narrative of England's 14th century unfolds not with the clang of swords, but with the brilliance of a realm shaped by kings, castles, and conquest. It was an era where superficial order masked underlying rivalries, all centered around a singular monarch whose reign would reverberate through the ages, King Edward III. He personified the quintessential medieval king, bold, battle-hardened, and endowed with a profound vision. His dominion stretched not only across England but also harbored aspirations for France. It was under his formidable banner that the 100 Years' War commenced, a brutal, generations-spanning campaign. Edward's triumphs in France cemented his legendary status. Yet within the intricate corridors of power, his greatest victory paradoxically transformed into his gravest bane. Edward III was blessed with a large progeny. 5 of his sons reaching the threshold of adulthood, each endowed with princely wealth, extensive lands, and formidable ambition. These were no docile, compliant heirs, but rather men determined to forge their own distinct legacies. The eldest, Edward, famously known as the Black Prince, was a knight of fearsome renown, a victor at the Battle of Poitiers, and seemingly destined to inherit the crown. However, fate, ever capricious, would thwart this destiny. The Black Prince predeceased his father. Consequently, upon Edward III passing in 1377, the crown bypassed his surviving sons and instead fell upon his grandson, Richard II. A mere 10-year-old, Richard was young, vulnerable, and encircled by uncles ravenous for power. From its very inception, Richard's reign was marred by political upheaval. While he would eventually mature into a king, he never truly evolved into a leader. His rule was characterized by an unsettling blend of arrogance, detachment, and pervasive paranoia. He harbored deep distrust for his nobles, exiling and executing rivals, and in doing so, he unwittingly cultivated a burgeoning tide of enemies, among them his own cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Henry was the progeny of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, the third surviving son of Edward III. He possessed not only royal blood but, more crucially, widespread noble backing. When Richard II audaciously exiled him and confiscated his inheritance, Henry's return to England was not an act of supplication but of audacious defiance. In 1399, he landed on English shores at the head of an army. The populace rallied. The lords shifted their allegiances, and King Richard ultimately surrendered. Henry Bolingbroke, seizing the crown, ascended to the throne as King Henry IV, not by divine right, nor by clear lineage, but by sheer force. This audacious moment represented a profound fracture within the English monarchy, a king deposed by his own cousin, inaugurating a dynasty now rooted in usurpation. Despite Henry IV's robust rule, and his successful transmission of the crown to his son, Henry V, the heroic victor of Agincourt, the fissures beneath the throne persisted. These nascent cracks would metastasize into gaping chasms following the untimely demise of Henry V. Henry V met an early death, leaving behind an infant son, Henry VI, a mere boy, not yet crowned, barely weaned, who now found himself king of both England and France. But while his formidable father had been a quintessential warrior, Henry VI was a gentle soul, a scholar, a man of profound piety, and tragically, prone to debilitating mental illness. He was inherently unsuited for the arduous demands of kingship. Under Henry VI's faltering reign, England itself began to waver. The glorious victories of Agincourt receded into memory, territories in France were irretrievably lost, trade routes collapsed, and nobles engaged in open warfare across the countryside. As the king drifted in and out of lucidity, others swiftly moved to seize the power vacuum. Among them was his ambitious wife, Queen Margaret of Anjou. The other formidable contender was Richard, Duke of York. York's lineage traced back to Lionel of Antwerp, the second surviving son of Edward III, bestowing upon him a technically stronger claim to the throne than the reigning Lancastrian kings. Furthermore, unlike the gentle Henry VI, York was a highly capable administrator, a skilled commander, and a man of clear vision. As Henry's health steadily deteriorated, York was appointed Lord Protector, effectively reigning as king in all but name. For a fleeting moment, England appeared to be on the cusp of salvation. Yet, this fragile stability would prove ephemeral. Queen Margaret, fiercely determined to secure her husband's crown for her son, rallied the Lancastrian nobility against York. The political struggle rapidly devolved into open animosity. Rumors flew thick and fast, armies began to gather, and England teetered precariously on the precipice of war. The impending conflict was not a mere rebellion. It was a deeply internecine struggle, family against family, cousin against cousin. Each faction was unshakably convinced that they, and not their adversaries, were the legitimate rulers of England. What followed would become a protracted series of brutal civil wars, spanning more than 3 tumultuous decades. We now refer to them as the Wars of the Roses. But it is crucial to comprehend that the roses were far more than mere blossoms. They were potent symbols. Red for Lancaster, white for York. Yet beneath these emblematic flowers lay men and women driven by the raw forces of ambition, unwavering loyalty, burning vengeance, and the primal instinct for survival. This was not a singular, monolithic war, but rather a multiplicity of conflicts, a relentless cycle of power seized and lost. Kings crowned and mercilessly murdered, children orphaned, and thrones indelibly stained with blood. And yet, it all germinated from a single, pivotal decision. A solitary rupture in the chain of succession, when Henry Bolingbroke Audacious Ly deposed Richard II. In that moment, the sacrosanct divine right of kings was irrevocably shattered. And in its shattered remnants, a kingdom governed by brute force, pervasive fear, and the relentless hand of fate emerged. This is not merely a chronicle of battles and betrayals. It is the harrowing saga of a kingdom plunging into the abyss of chaos, of a populace witnessing the royal house tear itself asunder, of mothers weeping for sons they would never again behold, of a land drenched in blood, spilled not for conquest, but for the very symbol of power, a crown. And so, as the sun began its descent on the fleeting peace of the Plantagenet era, and the ominous war drums commenced their rhythmic beat across the English hills, the stage was irrevocably set for the most sanguineous family feud in the annals of English history. The English crown, once radiating triumph under Henry V, had instilled fear, commanded victory, and inspired profound national pride. However, greatness does not invariably pass untarnished from father to son. Sometimes, it descends as a crushing burden. When Henry V breathed his last in 1422, the throne passed to his son. Henry VI, a mere babe of 9 months, barely weaned. The weight of the crown, far heavier than he could ever comprehend, settled upon him. In those nascent years of his reign, the realm was governed by a council of powerful nobles. The child king, shielded by the intricate protocols of regency, was kept remote from the tumultuous chaos of power. Yet, the incipient cracks were already forming within the edifice of the kingdom. Every noble at court perceived an opportune moment, a throne devoid of a true ruler, a kingdom lacking a clear, decisive voice. As Henry matured, a flicker of hope stirred among some. Perhaps he would grow into the crown. Perhaps he would inherit his father's formidable strength, his unyielding iron will. But it swiftly became apparent that this was no warrior king. Henry VI was inherently gentle, profoundly pious, and deeply bookish. His solace was found in scripture, scholarship, and quiet contemplation. He sought refuge in the tranquil cloisters of monasteries, not amidst the tumultuous clash of armor. Initially, some harbored the notion that this might prove a refreshing change, a king of peace rather than war, a ruler who would mend the festering wounds inflicted by generations of incessant fighting. But kings in the 15th century were not destined for quietude, and England, emphatically, was not at peace. The protracted 100 Years' War with France continued to rage relentlessly. The economy faltered, trade routes stagnated, and insidious factions festered within the royal court. Henry, inherently passive and indecisive, meticulously avoided conflict even as it inexorably burgeoned beneath his very feet. He misplaced his trust in manipulative individuals, bestowed power upon sycophants, and rewarded mere loyalty over genuine competence. Gradually, the nobles of England began to cleave into distinct factions, their loyalties aligning not with policies, but with individuals, families, and entrenched dynasties. Then, around his early 30s, the insidious illness began to manifest. Henry started to drift into profound silences during critical council meetings, staring blankly into space for hours on end. He ceased to recognize his closest friends, and even his own queen. The complete breakdown occurred in 1453. That fateful year, England suffered the calamitous loss of Bordeaux, the last significant English stronghold in France. It was a disaster both symbolically devastating and strategically crippling. The ambitious dream of an English France, so meticulously constructed by Henry V, perished that day, and with its demise, something profound within Henry himself seemed to irrevocably shatter. He plunged into a year-long absolute silence. He neither spoke nor reacted, transforming into a spectral shell of a man, a hollow, vacant figure cloaked in royal robes. The court succumbed to a pervasive panic. Ministers whispered conspiratorially, and nobles openly plotted. During this prolonged period of silence, Queen Margaret of Anjou bore their only son, Edward of Westminster. The court hoped this momentous news might rouse the king, that the advent of an heir would reawaken his latent paternal instincts. Yet there was nothing. He did not acknowledge the child, did not inquire about him, and did not so much as cast a glance in his direction. For many, this grim confirmation solidified their darkest suspicions. Either the king's mind was irrevocably broken, or the child was not truly his. Margaret, however, remained resolute and unyielding, fierce, intelligent, and commanding. She seized the reins of the court, championing her son's inherent right to succession and fiercely protecting her husband's beleaguered legacy, while skillfully navigating the treacherous labyrinth of English politics. But others, sensing weakness, prepared to exploit it. Chief among them was Richard, Duke of York. York harbored a formidable claim to the throne himself, arguably stronger than Henry's. He was ambitious, immensely capable, and increasingly exasperated by the chaos engulfing the realm. For years, he had been systematically excluded from power, denied advancement, and subjected to insults by Margaret's allies. But now, with the king incapacitated, he made his decisive move. In 1454, Parliament formally designated York as Lord Protector of the realm, placing him in effective charge of governance while the king remained unfit. For a brief, tantalizing moment, England experienced a semblance of order. The nobles rallied around him, and even the common populace admired his decisive authority. But Margaret, ever shrewd, perceived it for precisely what it was: an existential threat. York had, in essence, supplanted her husband, and more alarmingly, had begun to strategically position himself as the rightful heir, asserting that his actions were solely in the interest of true governance and national stability. The stage was irrevocably set for war, not merely between armies, but between entrenched families. Then, abruptly, in late 1454, Henry VI emerged from his profound stupor. He began to recognize individuals once more, resumed speaking, and rejoined council meetings. His mind seemed to have miraculously returned. There was widespread celebration, a surge of hope, but it was tragically fleeting. Henry retained no memory of the preceding year. He had no recollection of his son's birth, no comprehension of the profound crisis that had transpired, and no awareness of the deep fractures that had rent the kingdom asunder. To him, nothing had changed, but in reality, everything had. The Yorkists had solidified into a major political force. The Queen had meticulously constructed her own loyal circle of powerful magnates, and the country itself stood irrevocably divided. In his first act upon resuming the throne, Henry removed Richard of York from the Protectorate. Margaret's allies were swiftly reinstated, and York found himself once again marginalized. But this time, he would not retreat. In 1455, merely months after Henry's recovery, the first overt battle of the Wars of the Roses erupted at St. Albans. Richard of York led an armed force against the king's supporters. The Lancastrians were decisively crushed, and the royal court suffered a humiliating defeat. Henry himself was captured. The king, this fragile, broken man, was compelled to wear the crown while his adversaries ruled in his name. And so, the relentless cycle began. Each time Henry's mind faltered, the kingdom teetered precariously. Each time he displayed signs of recovery, Margaret attempted to reclaim authority. But York and his burgeoning lineage would not yield. They would not accept Henry's passivity, nor Margaret's assertive dominance, nor Edward of Westminster's inheritance. They held an unshakable conviction that the crown was rightfully theirs. And England, torn between a mentally infirm king and a host of ambitious claimants, began its inexorable descent into a war that would endure for 3 grueling decades, a war born not merely from political maneuvering or insatiable greed, but from the fractured mind of a king utterly incapable of ruling. As Henry VI's mind wavered and England spiraled into chaos, a singular figure emerged from the encroaching shadows. Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York. A man of noble royal blood and an iron will, Richard stood poised to challenge the fragile Lancastrian reign, thereby altering the very course of English history forever. Richard was no stranger to the intricate dance of power or the brutal realities of politics. Born in 1411, his lineage traced directly back to Edward III through both his parents, affording him a legitimate claim to the throne, a claim that many argued rivaled, and indeed surpassed, that of the reigning Lancastrian king, Henry VI. His family commanded vast estates and wielded immense influence, particularly in the north of England, rendering him a formidable force even before the encroaching madness of Henry began to unravel the realm. In stark contrast to Henry VI's gentle demeanor, Richard was bold, assertively decisive, and a battle-hardened soldier. He had spent years immersed in the grueling French campaigns of the 100 Years' War, accumulating invaluable military experience and earning profound respect. He was a man who possessed a deep, visceral understanding of the brutal realities of medieval power, the application of force, the cultivation of unwavering loyalty, and the meticulous execution of strategic planning. When Henry's health irrevocably collapsed in 1453, Richard was formally appointed Lord Protector of England. This appointment was ostensibly a temporary role, a stewardship intended to manage the kingdom during Henry's recovery. However, for Richard, it transcended mere stewardship. It was a potent opportunity to reclaim what he unshakably believed was rightfully his. Richard's initial actions as protector were swift and decisive. He embarked upon a resolute mission to restore order, to mitigate the rampant corruption that had permeated the court, and to confront the escalating threat posed by powerful factions relentlessly vying for influence. Yet, despite his inherent strength and commanding leadership, his tenure in power was persistently marred by unyielding opposition. Margaret of Anjou, Henry's fiercely protective queen, adamantly refused to relinquish her tenacious grip on power. She perceived Richard as a blatant usurper and an existential threat to her son's inheritance. Loyal Lancastrian nobles rallied devotedly around her, forging a bitter, deep-seated factional divide that rent the kingdom into 2 irreconcilable camps: the Yorkists, aligned with Richard, and the Lancastrians, steadfastly behind Margaret. The pervasive tension between these 2 implacable factions escalated with each passing year, fueled by deeply personal grievances, relentless political maneuvering, and ancient, festering family rivalries. At the very heart of this escalating conflict lay the fundamental question of legitimacy. Who possessed the rightful claim to the English throne? Richard pressed his claim with unwavering determination. He argued, with compelling logic, that Henry VI was unfit to rule due to his debilitating mental illness, and consequently, the crown should rightfully pass to someone demonstrably capable and strong. Many influential nobles concurred, weary of the pervasive weakness and burgeoning chaos that had engulfed the country. However, others remained steadfastly loyal to the Lancastrian cause, bound by solemn oaths, unbreakable family ties, or an overriding fear of igniting a full-blown civil war. England teetered precariously on the brink of utter fragmentation. In 1455, these simmering tensions exploded into overt conflict at the First Battle of St. Albans. This initial clash marked the brutal commencement of what would famously become known as the Wars of the Roses. Richard, leading his forces with resolute determination, struck a swift and devastating blow against the king's loyalists. The Lancastrians suffered a decisive defeat, and the king was taken captive. Despite his resounding victory, Richard did not immediately seize the crown. Instead, he reinstated Henry VI as king, yet effectively held the true reins of power firmly in his own hands. This delicate equilibrium, however, proved inherently unstable. Margaret and her unwavering supporters adamantly refused to accept York's ascendancy, and the kingdom remained irrevocably divided. Over the ensuing decade, the bitter struggle between York and Lancaster intensified dramatically. Battles erupted across the length and breadth of England, St. Blur Heath, Wakefield, Towton, and with each bloody confrontation, the stakes escalated, and the horrific bloodshed grew exponentially. Richard's sons, Edward and Richard, ferociously carried the Yorkist banner with unshakable loyalty, continuing their father's relentless fight even after his death on the battlefield in 1460. Edward would eventually seize the throne as King Edward IV, heralding a new, pivotal chapter in the unfolding saga. Richard, Duke of York, was a man propelled by an unyielding sense of duty, boundless ambition, and an unwavering conviction that England desperately required a strong, decisive king. His meteoric rise irrevocably set the stage for decades of relentless conflict, but also, paradoxically, for the eventual transformation of the English monarchy itself. His story is a testament to unwavering boldness amidst profound chaos. A powerful force shaping a kingdom teetering on the very edge of collapse. The late autumn of 1460 saw England gripped in the icy vice of civil war. A nation brutally rent asunder between the two symbolic roses, the pristine white of York and the blood red of Lancaster. The fragile peace that had tentatively followed the First Battle of St. Albans was inexorably crumbling. Both sides were meticulously gathering their strength, poised for the next decisive clash that would irrevocably determine the fate of the embattled kingdom. This mounting tension culminated in the Battle of Wakefield, a confrontation that would prove to be one of the bloodiest and most profoundly consequential engagements of the Wars of the Roses. Richard, Duke of York, had been relentlessly pressing his claim to the throne after being formally named Protector of the Realm during King Henry VI's recurring bouts of debilitating mental illness. By 1460, Richard's astute political and military maneuvering had positioned him in direct, unyielding opposition to Queen Margaret of Anjou, Henry's fiercely determined and formidable consort. Margaret, utterly unwilling to permit Richard to usurp her son's rightful crown, marshalled her loyal Lancastrian forces for war. The north of England, traditionally sympathetic to the Yorkist cause, served as both Richard's strategic power base and the inevitable battleground. However, by December of that tumultuous year, the Lancastrians had skillfully regrouped and sought to crush Richard's forces decisively, once and for all. The fateful confrontation was set near the modest town of Wakefield in Yorkshire, a locale that would soon be indelibly etched into history for its horrific carnage and profound political ramifications. Richard's army, though seasoned and undeniably loyal, was significantly outnumbered. Estimates vary, but Lancastrian forces likely outmatched the Yorkists by a ratio of at least 2 to 1. The Lancastrian commanders, among them Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, and John Clifford, were ruthless in their resolve and absolutely determined to terminate the Yorkist challenge decisively. In the days immediately preceding the battle, accounts suggest strategic deception employed by the Lancastrians. Some historians posit that they utilized misinformation to cunningly lure Richard out of his strongly defensive position. Richard, imbued with confidence in his leadership and desperate to deliver a decisive knockout blow to his implacable enemies, marched his forces to meet them in battle, despite the formidable odds. The Battle of Wakefield unfolded on a bitterly cold December 30th. As the massed armies clashed with terrifying ferocity, the Yorkists fought with an almost suicidal desperation and immense courage. Acutely aware that the outcome of this struggle could determine the very future of England, the Lancastrian forces, numerically superior and better supplied, swiftly gained the undeniable upper hand. The Yorkists found themselves surrounded, and were cut down with merciless efficiency. Richard himself was ensnared in the thick of the desperate fight. According to contemporary chroniclers, he fought valiantly until his very last breath but was ultimately captured. The treatment that followed was brutally shocking and designed to instill terror. Richard was summarily executed. His death, marked by gratuitous cruelty and public spectacle, explicitly intended to intimidate his followers and any individual who dared to challenge Lancastrian authority. Richard's severed head was then gruesomely transported to the city of York, where it was impaled upon a spike above the city gates, mockingly crowned with a flimsy paper crown. This grim, macabre symbol was intended as a stark, chilling warning: rebellion would not be tolerated, and the Lancastrian claim was absolutely supreme. However, rather than cowing Richard's staunch supporters, this barbarous act irrevocably transformed him into a martyr. The death of the Duke of York did not extinguish the Yorkist cause. Instead, it ignited a new, fervent zeal for the fight. His eldest son, Edward, Earl of March, stepped forward resolutely to lead the Yorkist faction. Edward's leadership marked a profound turning point, as he would swiftly prove himself a highly capable and charismatic commander, ultimately seizing the crown as King Edward IV. The Battle of Wakefield starkly revealed the brutal, unforgiving reality of medieval warfare and the extraordinarily high stakes inherent in dynastic conflicts. The human cost was staggering. Thousands perished in the brutal fighting, with countless more suffering from the widespread devastation that war inevitably inflicts upon homes and communities. Politically, the battle dramatically intensified the already gaping divide between the Yorkist and Lancastrian factions. Queen Margaret's prominent role as a war leader further polarized the kingdom. Some viewed her as a ruthless, determined protector of her son's rights, while others perceived her as a dangerous, destructive force driving England inexorably towards utter chaos. The profound consequences of Wakefield reverberated throughout the remainder of the conflict. The Lancastrians' temporary victory proved hollow, though they had eliminated Richard. The potent symbol and indomitable spirit of Yorkism lived on, stronger than ever. Edward's eventual, decisive victory at the Battle of Towton in 1461, which would become the largest and bloodiest battle of the Wars of the Roses, would emphatically overturn all Lancastrian gains and usher in a new Yorkist dynasty. Wakefield served as a grim, uncompromising lesson in the ruthless nature of power struggles and the profound fragility of peace in a bitterly divided land. It vividly demonstrated how personal ambition, unyielding loyalty, and devastating betrayal could ignite a civil war that would utterly devastate a nation. The Battle of Wakefield stands as a somber, enduring reminder of the true cost of war, not solely in lives tragically lost, but in the irreparable fracturing of a country's very soul. Richard, Duke of York's legacy endured, not merely through his progeny, but as a powerful symbol of the relentless struggle for order, strength, and legitimacy in medieval England. The Battle of Towton, fiercely contested on March 29, 1461, remains indelibly etched in history as the bloodiest and most pivotal engagement of the Wars of the Roses. It was a cataclysmic clash that not only determined the fate of the English crown but also left an enduring scar on the collective psyche of a nation ravaged by relentless civil war. Towton was no ordinary battle. It was a brutal, desperate struggle waged on a freezing spring day, where thousands of men fought and died with everything hanging precariously in the balance. Their very lives, their unshakable loyalties, and the entire future of England itself. Following the devastating Yorkist defeat at Wakefield in December 1460, where Richard, Duke of York, was tragically killed and publicly humiliated, the mantle of leadership passed to his eldest son, Edward, Earl of March. Edward, merely in his early 20s, possessed a keen, strategic mind and an inherent charisma that swiftly galvanized the flagging Yorkist cause. His father's brutal death served as the powerful catalyst that fueled Edward's unwavering determination to reclaim his family's legacy and assert his rightful claim to the English throne. Meanwhile, the Lancastrians, led by the formidable Queen Margaret of Anjou, remained fiercely resolute in their determination to protect her husband, King Henry VI, and their young son, Prince Edward. Margaret was far from a passive royal consort. She was a relentless and fiery leader who inspired fierce, almost fanatical loyalty among her devoted supporters. She was unyieldingly determined to extinguish the Yorkist threat once and for all. Towton was destined to be the ultimate, decisive showdown between these two implacable forces, York and Lancaster, each representing not merely a royal house but an entirely divergent vision for England's future. The stakes could not have been higher. The victor of Towton would seize the crown and dictate the fate of the entire kingdom, while the vanquished would be swept away by the bloody tides of history. The grim battlefield lay near the tranquil village of Towton in Yorkshire, a region traditionally steeped in Yorkist sympathies but also plagued by contested loyalties. The spring weather was harsh and unyielding. A bitter, cutting wind swept across the open fields, swirling snow and sleet that stung the faces of the weary soldiers on both sides. The bone-chilling cold was almost as fierce as the visceral hatred that propelled the combatants into the fray. Historical accounts estimate that anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 men were engaged in the titanic struggle, rendering Towton one of the largest and deadliest conflicts ever fought on English soil. The sheer, vast scale of the opposing armies ensured that the ensuing carnage would be utterly unparalleled. For many of the common soldiers, this battle was not merely a fight for their lords but a desperate struggle for their very survival. The day commenced with the distinctive, chilling blare of war horns and the resonant clatter of armor. Both sides had deployed their forces with meticulous strategic planning. The Lancastrians held the advantageous higher ground on a ridge, granting them a significant tactical superiority. Edward, acutely aware of this disadvantage, conceived a bold and audacious plan to exploit the shifting wind to his benefit. The wind was blowing fiercely, proving a critical factor in the unfolding battle. The Yorkist longbowmen unleashed a deadly, unrelenting barrage of arrows into the massed Lancastrian ranks. The English longbow was a weapon of terrifying precision and unparalleled terror, capable of firing volleys of arrows that could effortlessly penetrate armor and decimate tightly packed enemy formations. At Towton, the wind carried the Yorkist arrows with devastating accuracy, while arrows fired by the Lancastrians were frustratingly blown off course. The skies above darkened as thousands upon thousands of arrows rained down, creating an infernal hailstorm of death. The ground quickly became grotesquely littered with fallen men and horses, and the air was thick with the agonizing sounds of pain, primal fear, and guttural battle cries. This initial archery duel established the tone for the unrelenting ferocity and extraordinarily high casualty rate that would inevitably follow. Following the devastating arrow volleys, the battle inexorably descended into brutal, chaotic hand-to-hand combat. Knights, men-at-arms, and foot soldiers charged relentlessly across the muddy fields, clashing with the deafening clang of swords, axes, and polearms. The churned-up, treacherous ground, made even more perilous by the thrashing of dying horses and men, rendered footing precarious and movement utterly exhausting. Edward IV displayed truly remarkable leadership. Mounted on horseback and resplendent in shining armor, he galloped along the front lines, rallying his beleaguered men with stirring, impassioned words and his own fearless example. His youthful energy and unyielding determination inspired the Yorkist troops to press on, even against seemingly overwhelming odds. Despite fierce resistance from the Lancastrians, the Yorkist momentum steadily grew. The battle was characterized by a series of brutal, unrelenting clashes across multiple fronts. Some Lancastrian commanders fought with a desperate, almost suicidal intensity, knowing that defeat would signify utter ruin for their cause. The fight sprawled across several miles, transforming Towton into a vast, sprawling, chaotic melee where individual soldiers frequently found themselves isolated and cut off from their units. The noise was deafening, the metallic clash of steel, the screams of the grievously wounded, and the primal roar of the fighting men. As the battle wore on, the Lancastrian lines began to visibly falter. Exhaustion, the relentless toll of the arrow fire, and Edward's superior tactical prowess all contributed to a gradual, yet decisive, Yorkist advantage. Many Lancastrian soldiers broke ranks and fled in terror, only to be mercilessly hunted down in the brutal pursuit that inevitably followed. The aftermath was horrific beyond words. Estimates suggest that over 20,000 men perished on the battlefield that single day, almost unimaginable numbers for the medieval period. The bodies of fallen soldiers and horses grotesquely covered the snow-dusted fields, weapons scattered haphazardly amidst the carnage. Rivers nearby were chillingly reported to have run red with blood. The sheer scale of the slaughter at Towton profoundly shocked contemporaries and left an indelible impact on England's collective memory. Chroniclers described it as a battle of death, filled with scenes of unimaginable brutality and suffering. Politically, Towton marked an irrevocable turning point. Edward was swiftly proclaimed King Edward IV, signaling the triumphant ascendancy of the Yorkist dynasty. His coronation served as a powerful statement of his legitimacy and the ultimate success of the Yorkist cause. However, the Lancastrian faction was not entirely extinguished. Queen Margaret of Anjou and Prince Edward fled into exile, yet vowed to continue the fight. The war, though decisively tilted towards the Yorkists, was far from over. Towton also illuminated crucial changes in medieval warfare. The battle showcased the devastating effectiveness of the English longbow and underscored the critical importance of strong leadership, unwavering morale, and innovative tactical approaches. It served as a clear precursor to the evolving nature of warfare that would ultimately lead to the decline of heavily armored knights and the ascendance of more disciplined infantry and formidable ranged weaponry. The Battle of Towton remains an enduring symbol of profound sacrifice, unwavering courage, and the tragic cost of dynastic conflict. It serves as a stark, poignant reminder of how power struggles can utterly tear apart a nation and how the relentless pursuit of a crown can lead to unimaginable bloodshed. Towton's legacy is inscribed not only within the annals of history but also in the haunting memory of those who fought and perished on that frozen field, a powerful testament to the brutal ferocity of civil war and the fierce, unyielding determination of those who battled for the very future of England. With the overwhelming victory at Towton, Edward IV ascended to the throne, heralding a new and tumultuous chapter in the Wars of the Roses. His reign, while initially characterized by strength and unwavering determination, was nevertheless fraught with inherent fragility. Pervasive political intrigue, and continuing conflict that profoundly reflected the deep divisions tearing England asunder. Edward IV was unlike many monarchs who had preceded him. At merely 18 years of age when he was crowned, he combined youthful energy with a remarkably keen strategic mind. His reign commenced with an immediate and pressing need to consolidate power and firmly establish authority over a profoundly fractured kingdom. The devastation wrought by Towton had decisively shifted the balance in favor of the Yorkists, yet numerous Lancastrian loyalists remained scattered and defiantly resistant. One of Edward's paramount initial tasks was to stabilize the realm by generously rewarding his fervent supporters and meticulously securing unwavering loyalty through the careful appointment of powerful nobles to pivotal positions. He possessed a keen understanding that a robust network of alliances was absolutely crucial to maintaining his precarious grip on the throne. His court swiftly transformed into a nexus of relentless political maneuvering, where loyalty was both handsomely rewarded and rigorously tested. Edward himself was a charismatic and strikingly dashing figure, renowned for his innate charm, formidable physical prowess, and an undeniable love of luxury. His court was lavish, abounding with music, elaborate tournaments, and magnificent pageantry that meticulously projected an image of unwavering stability and regal grandeur. Yet, beneath this glittering veneer of splendor, the underlying political landscape was far from tranquil. The Lancastrian cause, though severely battered, was emphatically not defeated. Queen Margaret of Anjou remained a formidable and relentless opponent, diligently rallying scattered supporters and launching persistent guerrilla campaigns from her place of exile. The Lancastrians maintained control over certain strategic regions, thereby keeping the smoldering flames of rebellion alive. Edward's reign also faced persistent challenges stemming from internal Yorkist divisions. Powerful nobles, such as the Earl of Warwick, famously known as the Kingmaker, wielded tremendous and often disproportionate influence. Warwick had been instrumental in Edward's initial rise to power, but he grew increasingly resentful as Edward's favor shifted towards other courtiers. This growing tension would later erupt into open, destructive conflict, vividly illustrating the profound fragility of political alliances during this tumultuous era. Economically and socially, England was in the arduous process of recovering from years of incessant warfare, but the deep scars were undeniably evident. Many lands had been ravaged, populations displaced, and precious resources irrevocably drained. The crushing burden of war weighed heavily upon the common populace, who struggled desperately to reconstruct their lives amidst the ongoing uncertainty. Religious institutions played a profoundly significant role during this period, offering sanctuary and crucial support, but also becoming intricately entwined in the complex political affairs. Monasteries and churches frequently functioned as centers of both spiritual guidance and political influence, often mediating between warring factions. Despite the constant, pervasive threat of renewed fighting, Edward IV diligently worked to implement policies specifically aimed at strengthening royal authority and restoring a semblance of order. He meticulously negotiated with powerful nobles, managed complex feudal relationships with astute skill, and consistently sought to project an image of a just and supremely capable ruler. The king's military campaigns continued, though none attained the sheer scale or horrifying bloodshed of Toten. Skirmishes and localized battles flared sporadically across the countryside, serving as constant, grim reminders to all that the war was far from definitively over. Edward's innate ability to respond swiftly and decisively to these myriad threats was absolutely crucial in maintaining the stability of his reign. One of the most dramatic and pivotal moments of Edward's rule occurred in 1469, when the powerful Earl of Warwick audaciously rebelled against him. Warwick had become profoundly disillusioned by Edward's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner, an alliance which alienated many influential nobles. In a stunning and audacious reversal, Warwick switched his allegiance to the Lancastrians, temporarily restoring Henry VI to the throne. Edward was forced to flee to Burgundy, where he diligently gathered support for a triumphant comeback. His return to power in 1471 was swift and decisively executed, culminating in the decisive battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury, where Warwick was tragically killed and the Lancastrian heir, Prince Edward, was captured and subsequently executed. This marked a brutal and seemingly definitive end to the immediate Lancastrian threat and powerfully reaffirmed Edward's precarious position. However, Edward's reign continued to be marred by persistent instability beneath the surface. The underlying divisions between various Yorkist factions, the unresolved claims of lingering Lancastrian loyalists, and the inherently fragile nature of political alliances meant that periods of peace were often temporary and deeply uneasy. Edward IV's reign vividly highlights the intricate complexities of medieval kingship within a fractured realm. It was a period when inherent charisma and brute strength could undeniably win battles and crowns, but the sustained maintenance of power demanded unceasing vigilance, meticulous negotiation, and, at times, utterly ruthless action. Towards the twilight of his reign, Edward confronted new challenges, including burgeoning health issues and renewed conspiratorial plots. His sudden and unexpected death in 1483 plunged England back into a fresh maelstrom of chaos, irrevocably setting the stage for the final, dramatic episodes of the Wars of the Roses. Edward IV's period on the throne, though punctuated by significant victories and earnest attempts at consolidating power, was far from stable. The deeply entrenched underlying tensions within the Yorkist camp, coupled with persistent Lancastrian resistance and Edward's own personal choices, gradually eroded the fragile peace he had so strenuously fought to maintain. The final years of Edward's rule meticulously set the stage for one of the most dramatic and enduringly controversial chapters in the Wars of the Roses, his sudden demise and the tumultuous, fraught rise of his younger brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would ultimately be crowned as Richard III. Edward IV's health began an unexpected decline in the early 1480s. After years of relentless warfare, intricate political intrigue, and the immense stress of governing a divided kingdom, his once robust youth gave way to increasing frailty. The precise cause of his death in April 1483 remains a subject of intense historical debate, but contemporary accounts suggest he succumbed to a mysterious illness that rapidly worsened. His untimely death sent shockwaves through the realm, leaving the throne vulnerable and the future profoundly uncertain. Edward's eldest son, Edward V, was a mere 12 years old when he inherited the throne. This boy king's extreme youth and utter inexperience rendered the kingdom ripe for ruthless power struggles. In medieval England, a minor ruler was often little more than a figurehead, with true power wielded by regents or overwhelmingly powerful nobles. It was into this dangerously volatile environment that Richard, Duke of Gloucester, stepped forward, initially assuming the role of protector and guardian to his young nephew. Richard was a complex figure, simultaneously feared and admired. Known for his fierce loyalty to the Yorkist cause and his formidable reputation as a highly skilled warrior, he had cultivated the trust of many influential nobles. Yet his boundless ambition was equally well known. Richard's role in the new regime was critically important. The kingdom desperately required a strong leader to maintain order and effectively keep the Lancastrian threat at bay. However, a peaceful transition of power was not destined to be. Whispers began to circulate, rapidly gaining momentum, questioning the very legitimacy of Edward V's claim to the throne. The rumors grew louder, asserting that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, thereby rendering their children illegitimate and unfit to inherit the crown. These rumors, whether politically motivated or genuinely rooted in truth, provided the essential foundation for Richard's highly controversial claim. In June 1483, Edward V was lodged in the Tower of London, the traditional place for royal prisoners, but also the customary residence for monarchs awaiting coronation. His stay there, however, quickly took on an ominous tone. Richard, exercising his burgeoning authority as Lord Protector, swiftly moved to consolidate power, effectively sidelining the young boy king and his remaining supporters. Shortly thereafter, the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, vanished irrevocably from public view. Their disappearance remains one of England's most enduring and chilling mysteries. It is widely believed that they were murdered, though the precise circumstances and the true perpetrators remain shrouded in uncertainty. Many contemporaries harbored strong suspicions against Richard III, though historians continue to debate the full extent of his involvement. Richard's assumption of the throne was swift and decisively executed. In July 1483, he was formally declared King Richard III by Parliament, a move that legitimized his claim through an act known as Titulus Regius, which annulled Edward IV's marriage and declared his children illegitimate. Richard's coronation was conducted amidst widespread controversy, his reign indelibly shadowed by the suspicion and profound fear stirred by the fate of the young princes. Richard III's rule was undeniably complex and deeply troubled. On one hand, he demonstrated himself to be a capable administrator and a formidable military leader. He immediately took decisive steps to strengthen royal authority, improve the administration of justice, and quell burgeoning dissent. He convened several parliaments, and diligently worked to stabilize the realm after years of almost constant warfare. On the other hand, Richard's legitimacy and his public reputation were ceaselessly challenged. His enemies branded him a usurper and a tyrant, openly accusing him of ruthless ambition and cold-blooded murder. These grave accusations were further amplified by Tudor propagandists after his death, meticulously painting Richard as an unmitigated villain in English history. The political climate under Richard III was tense and inherently unstable. Many powerful Yorkist nobles who had previously supported Edward IV remained wary of the new king. Some, like the influential Stanley family, artfully concealed their true loyalties or shrewdly shifted allegiances depending on the rapidly evolving situation. In the north of England, Richard commanded strong support, particularly among the traditional Yorkist loyalists. However, in the south and west, many nobles were deeply discontented and viewed Richard's rule as a golden opportunity to revive dormant Lancastrian ambitions or to pursue their own self-serving agendas. Meanwhile, the Lancastrian cause was far from extinguished. Henry Tudor, a distant relative of the Lancastrian line, living in exile in Brittany and France, had emerged as the preeminent figurehead for the opposition to Richard III. His claim was undoubtedly weaker than that of the princes in the Tower. Yet his supporters rallied around him as a potent unifying symbol of resistance. The final years of Richard's reign were ominously dominated by the looming, inevitable threat of invasion. Henry Tudor diligently gathered support from disaffected nobles and foreign allies, solemnly promising to bring an end to the protracted civil strife and finally usher in an era of peace for England. Richard, acutely aware of this grave threat, meticulously prepared his forces for the inevitable confrontation. The stage was irrevocably set for the decisive battle that would determine the ultimate fate of the kingdom, the Battle of Bosworth Field. Before the battle, Richard demonstrably displayed his leadership by rallying his troops and attempting to secure unwavering loyalty from wavering nobles. However, the complex political maneuvering and the deeply personal ambitions of key figures played an absolutely crucial role in the ultimate outcome at Bosworth. Richard's forces faced Henry Tudor's army in a clash that was as much about loyalty and profound betrayal as it was about raw military might. The battle was fiercely contested, but Richard was ultimately defeated. Legend famously recounts that Richard fought valiantly, passionately declaring, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" before tragically falling in combat. Richard III's death marked the definitive end of the Plantagenet dynasty and, effectively, the Wars of the Roses, ushering in the transformative Tudor era with Henry VII's ascension to the throne. Richard's controversial reign and mysterious death have fueled centuries of intense debate, prolific literature, and boundless speculation, solidifying his place as one of England's most enigmatic monarchs. The fall of Edward IV and the dramatic rise of Richard III vividly revealed the inherently volatile nature of medieval power, where legitimacy, ambition, and loyalty intricately intertwined in deadly ways. The perplexing fate of the princes, the constantly shifting allegiances, and the brutal, conclusive battle at Bosworth all underscore the profound human drama and intricate political complexity of this tumultuous period. This chapter in the Wars of the Roses serves as a powerful reminder of how fragile rulership could be, and how the entire course of history often hinged precariously on individual choices and utterly unpredictable events. The Battle of Bosworth Field stands as one of the most pivotal moments in English history, serving as a brutal, climactic conclusion to the decades-long conflict known as the Wars of the Roses. This battle was not merely a military confrontation but a profound turning point that fundamentally reshaped the monarchy and meticulously set the stage for the ascendant Tudor dynasty. To fully appreciate the sheer magnitude of Bosworth, one must thoroughly explore the events leading up to the battle, the key figures intrinsically involved, the battle itself, and its profound, lasting aftermath. By the summer of 1485, the country was utterly weary. Years of incessant civil war had drained precious resources, irrevocably divided families, and fundamentally destabilized the realm. Richard III's reign, though marked by earnest attempts to consolidate power and restore a semblance of order, was perpetually fraught with deep-seated distrust and pervasive opposition. His claim to the throne was contested by many, particularly those who remained fiercely loyal to the Lancastrian cause, which found renewed hope in Henry Tudor, the exiled claimant from Brittany. Henry Tudor, initially a relatively obscure figure, was a Welsh noble with a tenuous claim to the throne through his mother's Lancastrian lineage. However, he quickly embodied a beacon of hope for all those vehemently opposed to Richard. With the crucial backing of French and Breton support, as well as disaffected English nobles, Henry meticulously prepared to challenge the Yorkist king. As Henry diligently gathered his forces and set sail for England, Richard swiftly mobilized to defend his coveted crown. The political chess game that ensued was incredibly complex. Loyalties were deeply split. Some nobles pledged their allegiance to Richard out of fear or genuine support, while others shrewdly hedged their bets or openly sided with Henry. On August 22, 1485, the two armies finally met near Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. The battlefield itself was a relatively small, uneven area, naturally surrounded by dense woods and fertile farmland. The size of the opposing forces was roughly comparable, with estimates suggesting Richard commanded approximately 12,000 men, while Henry's forces numbered between 5,000 and 8,000, significantly bolstered by experienced French soldiers. Richard's army was composed primarily of loyal Yorkist nobles and battle-hardened, experienced soldiers, confident in their king's leadership and desperate to defend the throne. Henry's troops, though fewer in number, were powerfully motivated by the promise of a new order and the profound hope of finally ending decades of ceaseless bloodshed. The battle commenced with skirmishes and probing attacks, but swiftly escalated into a fierce and utterly chaotic melee. Richard personally led his troops with characteristic bravery and unyielding determination, relentlessly seeking to strike a decisive blow against Henry's forces. One of the defining and most dramatic moments came when Richard, with startling clarity, spotted Henry Tudor on the battlefield. Recognizing that capturing or killing Henry would bring a swift and definitive end to the protracted conflict, Richard audaciously led a bold charge directly toward the Lancastrian leader. This audacious, almost reckless move demonstrated Richard's fearless nature but also perilously exposed his forces to extreme danger. The tide of the battle dramatically shifted when key Yorkist allies, most notably Lord Stanley and his brother Sir William Stanley, who commanded a substantial number of troops, chose, with profound and devastating impact, to switch sides. Their betrayal was utterly critical, allowing Henry's forces to effectively surround Richard and overwhelm his army. Richard fought valiantly until his very last breath. According to historical accounts and popular legend, he famously cried, a horse, my kingdom for a horse!" desperately seeking a mount to continue the fight. Despite his fierce resistance, Richard was struck down and tragically killed in battle at the relatively young age of 32. The death of Richard III marked the effective end of the Plantagenet dynasty and, decisively, the Wars of the Roses. Henry Tudor was swiftly crowned King Henry VII shortly after the battle, inaugurating the transformative Tudor era that would usher in profound political and social changes in England. Henry's victory at Bosworth was not merely a military triumph. It was a meticulously orchestrated consolidation of power. Understanding the inherently fragile nature of his claim, Henry sought to unite the warring factions through strategic marriages and far-reaching political reforms. The most symbolic of these was his marriage to Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's eldest daughter, which symbolically united the Lancastrian and Yorkist houses and gave birth to the iconic Tudor rose, a powerful and enduring symbol of reconciliation. The Battle of Bosworth also powerfully highlighted the evolving nature of warfare and politics in late medieval England. It underscored the paramount importance of loyalty, the devastating impact of betrayal, and the constantly shifting allegiances of powerful nobles who often acted as kingmakers. Moreover, Bosworth signaled the definitive end of an era where royal succession was frequently contested through brutal and protracted civil wars. Henry VII's reign established a more centralized monarchy, one characterized by increased authority vested firmly in the crown and diminished power for the once fractious nobles. The battle's profound impact extended far beyond mere politics. It profoundly influenced English culture, literature, and the popular imagination. Shakespeare's seminal play, Richard III, immortalized the fallen king as a tragic villain, meticulously shaping centuries of perceptions and interpretations. In the centuries that have elapsed since Bosworth, historians have engaged in fervent debate concerning the motivations and actions of key figures, from Richard's controversial rule to the Stanley's pivotal betrayal and Henry's unexpected rise. Archaeological discoveries, including the remarkable excavation of Richard III's skeleton beneath a parking lot in Leicester in 2012, have reignited immense interest in this dramatic chapter of history, providing new and invaluable insights into the battle and its participants. The legacy of Bosworth also serves as a poignant reminder of the staggering human cost of the Wars of the Roses. Thousands perished in the protracted conflict. Countless families were irrevocably torn apart, and the kingdom itself was left profoundly scarred. Yet, from this immense chaos, a new dynasty emerged that would ultimately oversee England's transformative transition from medieval feudalism to a burgeoning Renaissance power. In reflecting upon Bosworth Field, we perceive a microcosm of the Wars of the Roses itself, a fierce, desperate struggle for legitimacy, power, and ultimate survival, played out on a grand and unforgiving stage of shifting loyalties and profoundly uncertain futures. The battle represented a violent end to a tumultuous period, but also, significantly, the auspicious beginning of a new chapter in English history, one marked by cautious hope and the potent promise of enduring stability. With the devastating fall of Richard III at Bosworth Field, Henry Tudor ascended to the English throne as King Henry VII, marking the auspicious commencement of the Tudor dynasty. His rise was not merely the culmination of a brutal civil war but the dawn of an entirely new era, characterized by cautious governance, astute political shrewdness, and an unwavering drive to heal a deeply fractured kingdom. Henry's claim to the throne was not, by bloodline alone, ironclad. His lineage stemmed from the Lancastrian side, tracing descent from John of Gaunt, the third son of Edward III, but his bloodline was distant and intricately complicated. Many considered him a relatively obscure nobleman with a tenuous right to rule. His decisive victory at Bosworth was achieved more through exceptional political skill, astute military opportunism, and the crucial backing of powerful allies, rather than through pure hereditary claim. Acutely aware of the inherent fragility of his position, Henry VII moved with swift determination to consolidate his newly won power. His foremost priority was meticulously securing his legitimacy as king in the eyes of both the English nobility and the broader general populace. To achieve this, he undertook steps that were both deeply symbolic and eminently practical. One of his most profoundly significant political maneuvers was his strategic marriage to Elizabeth of York in January 1486. Elizabeth was the eldest daughter of Edward IV, the Yorkist king whose death had so dramatically reignited the conflict. This strategic union symbolically brought an end to the bitter, protracted feud between the houses of Lancaster and York. It effectively merged their respective claims, uniting two fiercely rival factions under one overarching banner, and thereby presenting a meticulously crafted united front to the entire kingdom. The marriage notably produced the emblematic Tudor rose, a powerful composite combining the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, an enduring symbol of profound peace and enduring unity. However, Henry's myriad challenges did not cease with his marriage. many staunch Yorkist loyalists continued to question his legitimacy and posed persistent threats to his rule. Henry was inherently cautious, and often ruthlessly pragmatic, in addressing these pervasive challenges. He expertly employed a calculated combination of diplomacy, strategic pardons, and, when necessary, coercive force to suppress dissent and systematically eliminate rivals. The grim fate of several claimants to the throne who dared to threaten his reign stands as compelling testament to his political acumen and, at times, his utterly ruthless determination. One of the most persistent and insidious threats emanated from Lambert Simnel, a young boy meticulously coached by Yorkist loyalists to impersonate Edward Plantagenet, Earl of Warwick, a legitimate Yorkist claimant whom Henry had shrewdly imprisoned. Simnel was even audacious enough to be crowned King Edward VI in Dublin in 1487. Henry responded with a measured blend of force and unexpected mercy. He publicly paraded the real Warwick through the streets to unequivocally expose the blatant fraud, brutally crushed the rebel forces at the Battle of Stoke Field in 1487, effectively terminating the last significant military opposition to his rule, and remarkably, pardoned the young Simnel, assigning him to work in the royal kitchens. But more threats relentlessly followed. Perkin Warbeck, another pretender, audaciously claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury, one of the infamous princes in the Tower. Warbeck garnered crucial support from foreign powers, notably France and Burgundy, thereby posing a significant and enduring threat to Henry's reign. Nevertheless, Henry's meticulously cultivated intelligence network and astute strategic diplomacy ultimately led to Warbeck's capture and subsequent execution. Beyond these external threats, Henry VII proved himself a masterful architect in strengthening the monarchy's fundamental financial and administrative foundations. The Wars of the Roses had thoroughly devastated the English economy, severely depleted the royal treasury, and left many nobles excessively powerful and notoriously unruly. Henry sought to restore order through meticulous management of royal finances, judiciously reducing the power of overly mighty nobles, and strategically increasing the crown's overarching authority. He meticulously revived and significantly expanded the use of the Court of Star Chamber, a formidable judicial body that enabled the king to effectively curb noble excesses and ensure justice. Through this powerful instrument, Henry kept the nobility firmly in check, thereby preventing them from surreptitiously building private armies that could potentially challenge the crown's supremacy. His fiscal policies were undeniably prudent, and at times, unpleasantly harsh. He levied taxes with remarkable efficiency and was widely known for his meticulous, almost obsessive, attention to royal revenue, measures that were often unpopular but undeniably effective in stabilizing the monarchy's precarious finances. Henry VII's foreign policy was similarly cautious and meticulously calculated. He diligently sought to avoid costly wars that could drain precious resources and provoke domestic instability. Instead, he pursued a policy of peace through strategic marriages and carefully cultivated alliances. His daughter, Margaret Tudor, was strategically married to James IV of Scotland, forging a crucial link that would, much later, lead to the eventual union of the English and Scottish crowns. Despite his many successes, Henry's reign was often marked by an underlying tension. His inherently cautious and sometimes secretive nature bred suspicion and lingering resentment among certain nobles and courtiers. His strict enforcement of laws and rigorous taxation earned him a reputation for frugality and severity, often rendering him unpopular. Nevertheless, Henry's reign undeniably laid the critical groundwork for England's profound transformation from a feudal kingdom, perpetually plagued by internecine warfare, into a more centralized and powerful monarchy. He significantly strengthened the crown's authority, established enduring institutions, and brought a precious measure of peace and stability that had eluded the realm for decades. The Tudor dynasty he founded would subsequently produce some of England's most celebrated monarchs, including Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, who would further shape the nation's history, culture, and global influence. Henry VII's legacy is complex and multifaceted. He was not a charismatic or universally beloved ruler like some of his illustrious successors, but his shrewdness, profound political savvy, and unyielding determination prevented England from spiraling back into utter chaos. He was an ultimate survivor who intimately understood the brutal realities of power and ruthlessly did whatever was necessary to maintain it. As the dust slowly settled on the Wars of the Roses, Henry's ascendancy signaled a pivotal new chapter, one where England would emerge from the ravages of civil war to become a nation poised for the flourishing Renaissance and ambitious global expansion. The Tudor era began as a cautious restoration but would soon blossom into a period of profound change and an enduring legacy. The ascension of Henry VII was not merely the conclusion of decades of debilitating civil war, but rather the auspicious beginning of a fundamental transformation in English governance, society, and the very nature of monarchy. Henry's reign marked a decisive and irrevocable shift from the chaotic feudal structures and incessant conflicts of the Wars of the Roses towards a more centralized and bureaucratic state. A transformation that would meticulously lay the foundational bedrock for the England we recognize today. Henry VII acutely understood that to preserve the fragile peace he had so strenuously won on the battlefield, he needed to fundamentally alter the very essence of royal authority and governance. The archaic medieval system, wherein powerful nobles commanded vast independent territories and private armies, had been the primary root cause of the endless, destructive conflicts. Now, the crown needed to assert itself with unprecedented firmness, systematically limiting the entrenched power of the nobility and tightening its rigorous control over law, finance, and administrative functions. One of Henry's most effective and frequently employed tools for achieving this monumental objective was the significant expansion and increased utilization of the Court of Star Chamber. Originally established to address complex legal issues that lay beyond the conventional reach of local courts, the Star Chamber gradually evolved into a formidable instrument of direct royal authority. It was meticulously designed to curb rampant abuses perpetrated by the nobility, particularly addressing their private feuds, the illegal retention of armed men, and the pervasive lawlessness that had plagued the provinces. The court operated with a distinct degree of secrecy and direct royal influence, which allowed Henry to enforce his will with significantly fewer obstacles. Through the Star Chamber and other burgeoning royal courts, Henry relentlessly prosecuted rebellious nobles and those consistently suspected of disloyalty. The systematic use of bonds and recognizances, legal agreements that compelled nobles to guarantee their good behavior under the explicit threat of heavy financial penalties, became a common and effective tactic to keep powerful lords firmly in check? This meticulously designed system of financial penalties and pervasive surveillance effectively restrained the aristocracy from amassing private armies or covertly engaging in plots against the crown. Beyond these stringent legal measures, Henry was an undisputed master of astute political symbolism and meticulously crafted public image. He profoundly understood the paramount importance of portraying the monarchy as a stable, benevolent, and divinely sanctioned institution. His coronation and all subsequent ceremonies were meticulously planned to emphasize an unbroken continuity with the revered past while simultaneously signaling the dawn of a new era of profound unity and enduring order. Henry also labored tirelessly to meticulously rebuild the royal finances, which had been catastrophically depleted by years of incessant warfare. He implemented rigorous fiscal policies, diligently ensuring the efficient collection of taxes and customs duties, and while his measures were sometimes perceived as harsh or excessively stingy, they undeniably succeeded in replenishing the royal treasury and adequately funding the government's essential operations without resorting to excessive borrowing or, critically, weakening the crown's hard-won independence. The significant strengthening of royal finances allowed Henry to maintain a standing army unequivocally loyal to the crown, rather than relying solely on the unreliable feudal levies from the nobles. This was a subtle, yet profoundly significant, step towards the modern state, where the monarch exercised direct control over the means of force, International diplomacy represented another arena where Henry exercised meticulous and calculated strategy. His foreign policy was largely defensive and remarkably pragmatic. After years of devastatingly costly wars under his predecessors, Henry's primary objective was to maintain a peaceful equilibrium with England's immediate neighbors while simultaneously securing strategic alliances that would undeniably bolster his legitimacy and enhance his national security. Marriage alliances played a pivotal role in this intricate diplomatic strategy. Aside from his own strategic marriage to Elizabeth of York, Henry meticulously arranged marriages for his children to further cement crucial political ties. The marriage of his daughter, Margaret Tudor, to James IV of Scotland was particularly significant, forging a crucial link that would eventually, over a century later, lead to the ultimate union of the English and Scottish crowns. Henry also maintained a cautious yet firm stance towards formidable continental powers such as France and Burgundy, meticulously balancing relationships through astute diplomacy and occasional, carefully calculated military posturing, all without engaging in prolonged, resource-draining conflict. His paramount priority remained maintaining unwavering stability at home and, critically, preventing foreign support for rival claimants to his throne. Domestically, Henry's reign witnessed a gradual but profoundly important shift in the actual conduct of governance. The emergence of a professional bureaucracy, meticulously staffed by educated administrators and astute legal experts, began to systematically replace the older, less efficient system of feudal officials and nobles managing local government. This significant bureaucratic expansion demonstrably improved the efficiency and consistent application of royal authority across the entirety of England. The Tudor court itself became a vibrant center, not only of intricate politics but also of burgeoning culture and vital patronage. Henry actively encouraged the flourishing of the arts and various forms of learning, thereby paving the way for the magnificent English Renaissance under his eventual successors. While Henry VII's personality was frequently described as cautious and undeniably frugal, his reign nevertheless planted the crucial seeds for significant cultural growth and profound modernization. The social impact of Henry's policies was profound and far-reaching. By systematically limiting noble power and expanding the reach of royal justice, he significantly reduced the frequency of private wars and the pervasive lawlessness, thereby bringing a measure of relative peace and stability to the countryside. The rigorous enforcement of laws against the legal retaining of private armies and other unauthorized activities diminished the power of unruly lords, greatly assisting in the stabilization of local governance. However, Henry's progressively tightening grip on power was not without its share of controversy. His rigorous tax collection methods and stringent enforcement of financial penalties sometimes bred deep resentment among both nobles and commoners alike. His rule could be undeniably harsh, and his reputation for frugality often translated into widespread suspicion or even fear. Yet, his policies undeniably laid the fundamental foundation for a more stable and powerful English monarchy. The enduring legacy of Henry VII's consolidation of power would resonate profoundly throughout the entire Tudor era and far beyond. The monarchy was no longer merely a figurehead, precariously supported by fractious nobles. It had definitively become the central, ultimate authority in England, demonstrably capable of directing the nation's political, legal, and financial affairs with far greater directness and efficacy. This fundamental transformation meticulously helped prepare England for the complex challenges and nascent opportunities of the 16th century, including significant religious upheaval, ambitious global exploration, and the inevitable rise of a powerful nation-state. Henry VII's reign, born from the raw chaos of the Wars of the Roses, was the crucible in which the modern English monarchy and state definitively began to take tangible shape. The Tudor dynasty, so carefully and determinately founded by Henry, would go on to command English history for over a century, profoundly shaping the cultural, political, and religious landscape in ways that still echo discernibly today. But it all commenced with the deliberate and often unglamorous work of consolidating power, assiduously restoring order, and meticulously building a government robust enough to withstand the tumultuous storms of the past and the myriad uncertainties of the future. The death of Richard III at Bosworth and the subsequent rise of Henry VII did not merely mark the definitive end of the Wars of the Roses. They signaled the slow but utterly undeniable twilight of the feudal world in England. This was not a sudden, cataclysmic transformation, but rather a steady and deliberate unraveling of a social order that had dominated for many centuries. Feudalism, at its very core, was a hierarchical system meticulously built upon land, unwavering loyalty, and inherent military obligation. Lords held vast estates, granted to them by the king, and in return, they owed him service and armed support. Beneath them existed intricate layers of lesser nobles, knights, and peasants, all inexorably locked into a rigid web of duty and dependence. However, by the late 15th century, the old order was visibly decaying. The Wars of the Roses had brutally exposed the fatal flaw inherent in feudalism, the king's over-reliance on powerful nobles for military might. These formidable barons, often wealthier and better armed than the crown itself, possessed the dangerous capacity to raise private armies and wage their own personal feuds, sometimes against each other, and at other times, audaciously against the king himself. They had, in essence, become unchecked lords of war, hungry for ever more power. The pervasive chaos that engulfed England in the 15th century was, in significant part, a direct result of too much noble power and a severe deficit of centralized authority. Henry VII profoundly understood this reality. If he was to secure his crown and safely transmit it to his descendants, he could no longer permit the great houses to dominate England with impunity. The crown had to become stronger than any lord, not through further bloodshed, but through meticulous control. Henry began to systematically dismantle the feudal structure, piece by painstaking piece. One of the most symbolic and impactful changes came in the rigorous control of livery and maintenance. These were the distinctive badges and liveries proudly worn by a noble's retainers, which effectively served as their private armies. In previous generations, a great lord might be ostentatiously followed by hundreds of armed men bearing his unique symbol. Henry shrewdly passed laws to severely restrict this practice. Nobles could no longer maintain vast private forces, and doing so became an offense punishable by heavy financial penalties. Power was being systematically pulled back from the disparate countryside and decisively drawn into the firm hands of the monarch. Henry also skillfully shifted the primary source of power from mere landholding and inherited birthright to bureaucratic loyalty and demonstrable administrative skill. He strategically elevated men of more humble origins, lawyers, clerks, merchants, into pivotal positions of influence. These were not landed barons with ancient ancestral titles, but rather men who owed their entire standing and allegiance directly to the crown. This nascent meritocratic thread, subtle though it was, began to weave a new and different pattern into the fabric of English governance. Royal power was no longer precariously propped up by mere birth. It was increasingly solidified by proven competence and unwavering loyalty. The far-reaching financial reforms introduced by Henry further accelerated the decline of traditional feudal norms. Under feudalism, kings had conventionally relied on taxes levied through their lords or irregular feudal dues. Henry thoroughly overhauled this archaic system. He meticulously developed new and more efficient methods for directly collecting customs, fines, and feudal rights through the crown's burgeoning bureaucratic machinery. Income became significantly more predictable and less precariously dependent on the capricious favor or unreliable cooperation of individual nobles. He also managed royal lands with exceptional care. When nobles died without heirs or were found guilty of treason, their lands were systematically confiscated. Instead of simply granting these confiscated lands to another ambitious lord, Henry often retained them under direct royal control, thereby steadily expanding the size and wealth of the crown's direct holdings. The crown estates expanded significantly, and with them, the king's independence from his nobility grew exponentially. Concurrently, the role of Parliament began its gradual but significant evolution. While still a far cry from modern democracy, Parliament was no longer merely a pliant tool of the powerful barons. Henry utilized it sparingly, primarily convening sessions to secure legitimacy or to enact specific financial or legal measures. However, its increasing involvement in taxation and lawmaking was setting a profound precedent, one that would mature and gain immense significance in the centuries to come. In the countryside, social structures were also visibly shifting. The protracted wars had devastated many noble lines, and their lands, frequently left untended or unclaimed, became opportunities for significant upward mobility. A new and influential class of gentry, comprising wealthier yeomen and burgeoning merchants, began to acquire land and exert greater influence. These individuals were not lords, in the traditional feudal sense, but they possessed growing wealth, literacy, and powerful ambition. The English economy was also undergoing profound changes. With feudal dues diminishing and the ascendancy of a money-based economy, landowners increasingly turned to enclosing land for profitable sheep farming, driven by the booming wool trade. This enclosure movement would have devastating effects on many peasants, often forcibly driving them off common lands and generating early stirrings of urban migration and the emergence of a wage-based labor market. It represented yet another significant crack in the venerable old feudal order. Cities, particularly the burgeoning metropolis of London, began to rise dramatically in importance. Trade, finance, and various crafts flourished, and with their growth, a new class of influential merchants, astute bankers, and skilled artisans emerged, individuals who had little established place within traditional feudal hierarchies but possessed steadily growing influence in the real economy. The vibrant cultural energy that would soon blossom into the magnificent English Renaissance had its nascent roots in these profound shifting dynamics. Henry VII also strategically invested in strengthening law and order, not through brute force alone, but through systematic and meticulous control. He significantly expanded the role of justices of the peace and rendered local governance more directly accountable to the crown. Common law courts became more accessible, and justice was increasingly delivered not through arbitrary feudal arbitration but through established, centralized legal institutions. This gradual process of centralization, the development of a professional bureaucracy, and the rigorous control over the administration of justice meticulously laid the fundamental groundwork for the modern state. No longer was England a disparate patchwork of quasi-independent noble territories. It was steadily transforming into a unified kingdom under the firm hand of a single, strong monarch. The Church, too, remained a powerful and influential force, but even here, the subtle seeds of change had been sown. While Henry remained a devout Catholic and strategically utilized religion to bolster his legitimacy, the political independence he exercised in his dealings with Rome hinted at future far-reaching tensions. His son, Henry VIII, would later ignite a full-blown religious revolution. But its crucial preconditions were quietly being established under Henry VII's watchful and astute reign. By the time Henry VII died in 1509, England was a profoundly different place from the realm he had inherited. The formidable power of the old noble houses had been irrevocably broken. The protracted wars that had defined generations were finally over. Feudalism, once the foundational bedrock of English society, was no longer the dominant force. In its place stood a monarchy significantly strengthened by a burgeoning bureaucracy, a more coherent legal framework, and robust financial stability. Henry's legacy is frequently overshadowed by the flamboyant drama and immense splendor of his son and granddaughter, Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. But it was Henry VII who painstakingly built the indispensable foundation. He was not a charismatic warrior or a flamboyant ruler, but he was undeniably shrewd, disciplined, and remarkably deliberate. His quiet revolution, the profound transformation of England from a feudal kingdom into a centralized state, ensured that the Tudors would reign not merely through birthright, but through the inherent strength of the meticulously crafted system he had brought into being. And so, the Wars of the Roses did not merely conclude on the battlefield. Their final, defining act played out in policy, in law, in finance, and in the very fabric of society itself. They left indelible scars, certainly, but they also effectively cleared the stage for a new England to rise from the ashes. The Wars of the Roses may have concluded in the 15th century, but their profound impact undeniably lingers. Indelibly etched into the political DNA, cultural myths, and even the architectural landscape of Britain. To attempt to comprehend modern Britain without grasping the spectral shadow of this brutal civil war is to fundamentally miss the very foundation upon which it stands. Although the bloodshed ceased with the crowning of Henry VII, the profound psychological toll of the conflict persisted far longer. For 3 tumultuous decades, the English people had lived under the constant, pervasive threat of sudden rebellion, shifting loyalties, and kings who were gloriously crowned one year only to be ignominiously buried in disgrace the next. The scars were not merely political, they were deeply personal, generational, and spiritual. Let us commence with governance, one of the most crucial, yet frequently overlooked, legacies of the Wars of the Roses, the dramatic rise of centralized monarchy. The chaos and devastation of the wars imparted a brutal and unforgettable lesson. A weak monarch inevitably invites disaster. Henry VI's profound passivity had effectively opened the very gates to civil war. His inherent inability to manage the rampant ambitions of the powerful great nobles, to command the unwavering loyalty of his subjects, or to assert firm control over the government had inexorably plunged the country into decades of relentless bloodshed. The Tudors absorbed that harsh lesson to their very core. Henry VII, and subsequently his formidable son Henry VIII, would meticulously transform the English monarchy into one of the most powerful and influential in all of Europe. No longer a mere figurehead precariously balanced on the shoulders of the barons, the king definitively became the state itself. The Wars of the Roses taught future monarchs that survival was inextricably linked to tight, unyielding control of the treasury, the army, and the legal system. But it was not solely the monarchy that underwent profound evolution. The once dominant nobility of England was irrevocably broken. Entire families were tragically wiped out in the protracted conflict, their vast lands confiscated, their ancient bloodlines utterly extinguished. Those who managed to survive were utterly weary of conflict. The battle-hardened Tudor regime meticulously ensured their submission. Nobles no longer functioned as independent warlords commanding private armies. Instead, they were transformed into courtiers and administrators, their power shifting decisively from the chaotic battlefield to the controlled boardroom, from the brutal sword to the administrative seal. This profound shift meticulously laid the crucial groundwork for the modern British civil service, as the Tudors, by prioritizing bureaucratic competence over brute strength, created the earliest structures of a state that functioned through systematic processes rather than relying on fickle personal loyalty. Today's model of parliamentary government, an independent judiciary, and regulated power has its earliest, nascent roots in this pivotal period of profound restructuring. Yet, the legacy transcends mere politics. It is profoundly cultural and psychological as well. The Wars of the Roses left behind an indelible cultural memory steeped in division, pervasive betrayal, and eventual, hard-won restoration. It is no mere coincidence that William Shakespeare, writing over a century later, discovered his greatest dramatic inspiration in these very tumultuous events. Henry VI, Richard III, these were not merely plays, they were a form of national therapy. Shakespeare took raw historical trauma and imbued it with profound meaning, definitive form, and perhaps a semblance of closure. In Richard III, the defeated king is famously portrayed as a hunchbacked villain, an enduring symbol of tyranny, treachery, and moral decay. And when he is finally overthrown by Henry Tudor, the audience experiences a collective sigh of profound relief, not simply because of who Henry is, but because of what he powerfully represents. Stability, unity, the definitive end of civil war. These plays continue to resonate profoundly even today because their emotional truths remain universally applicable: the innate fear of chaos, the fervent longing for justice, the inherent suspicion of those wielding power. Even modern political language is haunted by this enduring legacy. When British commentators describe politicians as scheming like a Yorkist, or speak of Lancastrian loyalty, they are drawing directly from a shared cultural memory that originated in this very war. Even in the realm of sports, the legacy stubbornly persists. The famous rivalry between the football clubs of Manchester United, Lancashire, and Leeds United, Yorkshire, has long been popularly dubbed the War of the Roses Derby. Their respective county emblems, the red rose and the white rose, are potent visual echoes of an ancient conflict that most fans probably couldn't recite in full, but still viscerally feel in spirit. Architecture and geography, too, bear the indelible scars. Throughout England, one can discover castles and haunting ruins, blasted apart not by foreign invading armies, but by the relentless internal conflict of civil war. Places like Sandal Castle, Tewkesbury Abbey, and Bosworth Field have become hallowed pilgrimage sites for dedicated history buffs. Roads, towns, and churches still proudly bear the names of battles, of families, of profound betrayals. It is all still palpably present in the very bones of the landscape. Even language itself was irrevocably shaped by this conflict. During the wars, England began a distinct process of turning inward. The Norman French that had dominated royal courts for centuries rapidly faded from prominence. English, once dismissively relegated as the language of peasants, emphatically became the tongue of kings. Edward IV, Richard III, and Henry VII all ruled in English, signifying their dominance not just by blood, but by shared language. This profound shift significantly helped to unify the populace under a shared national identity, thereby accelerating the decline of lingering medieval divisions between Norman and Saxon, noble and commoner. The war also fundamentally altered the very nature of historical narrative. For the first time, propaganda emerged as a powerful political weapon. The Tudor dynasty, in particular, profoundly understood that winning the war was merely half the battle. The other crucial half lay in meticulously controlling the narrative. That is precisely why Henry VII assiduously sponsored chroniclers who meticulously painted the Tudors as saviors and their vanquished enemies as monstrous villains. That is why the White Rose of York became, in popular culture, the enduring symbol of arrogance and tyranny, while the Red Rose of Lancaster became the powerful symbol of rightful rule. Even though both sides had committed appalling atrocities, this manipulation of public memory has resonated profoundly throughout British history. From the tumultuous Reformation to the Glorious Revolution and even the devastating World Wars, British leaders have learned to meticulously craft their legitimacy not merely through deeds, but through compelling stories. And it all commenced here. Then there is the psychological residue, one of the least tangible yet most potent legacies of the Wars of the Roses. The profound British obsession with moderation and unwavering stability. To this very day, British political culture tends to instinctively shy away from extremes. Radicals on either end of the spectrum are viewed with deep suspicion. Coalition, compromise, and continuity are profoundly valued. Part of this inherent preference stems from having once teetered precariously on the very edge of total collapse. The Wars of the Roses taught the nation that when power swings too far in one direction, or fragments into too many competing factions, the inevitable result is utter ruin. Even the monarchy itself, now constitutional and ceremonial, bears the indelible imprint of those bloody lessons. Today's British royals rule not with swords or armies, but with soft power, intricate ritual, enduring tradition, and powerful symbolism. They represent unity, because the stark alternative, as history so vividly demonstrated, is civil war. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the Wars of the Roses lies in the profound irony at its core. The war began as a bitter dynastic dispute over who held the absolute right to wear the crown. It encompassed brutal battles, profound betrayals, and the dramatic rise and fall of countless noble families. And yet, in the end, the dynasty that emerged triumphantly, the Tudors, possessed barely a legitimate claim at all. Henry VII was not a powerful duke, or the son of a reigning king. He was an exile. The product of a disputed lineage, a man who had to win his throne with foreign troops and meticulous calculation. But that, perhaps, is the precise point. The Wars of the Roses taught England that royal legitimacy is not simply inherited. It is earned through strong leadership, astute strategy, unwavering unity, and above all, demonstrable results. Henry VII painstakingly built peace. His son Henry VIII forged strength. His granddaughter Elizabeth engineered a golden age. None of it would have been remotely possible without the brutal crucible of civil war that preceded it. The roses blooming today walk the hallowed halls of the Tower of London, or wander amidst the evocative ruins of Ludlow Castle, or traverse the grassy fields of Bosworth, and you can still feel it. The war is not gone, it lingers in the very stone, in the enduring legend, in the whispered names of long-dead kings. Gaze upon the Tudor rose carved above cathedral doors or proudly printed on the insignia of English heraldry. It still combines red and white, Lancaster and York, not as implacable rivals, but as potent reminders. Reminders that from the ashes of war can spring profound peace. That from ruin can rise something enduring, that unity, once shattered, can be reforged, and that England, for all its struggles, endured. The sun, a cautious painter, ascended slowly over the English countryside, casting long, mournful shadows across fields that had once run vivid with the blood of rival kings. The roar of cannons had long since faded into silence. The clang of clashing swords and guttural cries of battle now mere memories, buried deep beneath the grass and earth. But despite the outward calm, England was irrevocably transformed. The Wars of the Roses may have culminated with the coronation of Henry VII, but peace was not simply the cessation of conflict. It was a fragile, delicate entity. Something that demanded meticulous safeguarding and careful reshaping from the very ruins of a nation torn asunder. In the nascent days of Tudor rule, the prevailing mood across England was a complex mixture of cautious hope intertwined with profound exhaustion. For far too long, the populace had endured under the grim shadow of constant rebellion and shifting allegiances. Families had tragically lost sons and fathers to fleeting causes that swiftly dissolved in the chaotic maelstrom of shifting thrones. Loyalty itself had become a perilous word, all too easily punished when the capricious winds of power abruptly changed direction. It was against this somber backdrop that Henry VII ascended to the throne, not amidst thunderous applause, but with watchful silence. He was not hailed as a conquering hero. He was tolerated, scrutinized, and even subtly feared. But Henry possessed a crucial understanding: he had not inherited peace. He would have to meticulously build it. His initial moves were meticulously calculated, almost surgical in their precision. He married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, thereby uniting the houses of Lancaster and York in a gesture of reconciliation so profoundly powerful that it became emblematic of the very end of the Civil War itself. It was not merely a marriage. It was a potent message: the red rose and the white rose, finally bound together in the newly forged Tudor emblem, eloquently conveyed a story that Henry desperately wanted all of England to believe: that the fighting was irrevocably over, the crown was securely held, and the future belonged not to war, but to unwavering order. But symbolism alone would not suffice to hold the fractured country together. Henry keenly understood this. So, he turned his attention to control. Not through further bloodshed, but through astute governance. His policies were firm, and at times, undeniably ruthless. He systematically curtailed the power of the nobility by rigorously limiting their private armies and meticulously monitoring their wealth with aggressive taxation. Those who had once commanded battalions now found themselves bound by literal legal bonds of good behavior, agreements that ensured their loyalty with the explicit threat of financial ruin. It was the first time in generations that the nobility experienced genuine subordination to the crown. They might still possess titles and vast lands, but they no longer held the future of England in their grasp. Henry also significantly expanded the role of the Royal Council, particularly a smaller, specialized group within it. The Council learned in the law. This body meticulously specialized in extracting money from nobles through fines, relentless legal pressure, and exhaustive investigations. To many, it felt like blatant extortion, but to Henry, it was vital insurance. Every coin collected, every noble humbled, was a stone carefully laid in the foundational edifice of his burgeoning dynasty. Yet, beneath all this meticulously constructed structure and astute statecraft, there persisted a deep, invisible scar in the national psyche. The Wars of the Roses had bequeathed more than mere political devastation. They had profoundly eroded trust in the crown, trust in the nobles, and even trust in the very idea of a stable future. It would necessitate more than taxes and carefully arranged royal marriages to mend that grievous wound. Henry understood that his rule depended not merely on surviving, but on fundamentally reshaping the very narrative of what it meant to be king. So, he transcended the role of a mere ruler. He became a mythmaker. He commissioned elaborate genealogies that meticulously strengthened his claim to the throne, ruthlessly suppressed chronicles that favored his rivals, and painstakingly curated how his reign would be remembered. It was historical storytelling deployed as a powerful instrument of power, a legacy forged not on the tumultuous battlefield, but within the impressionable minds of future generations. This deliberate manipulation of memory would reach its full, spectacular bloom under his son, Henry VIII, who grew up not amidst the chaos of civil war, but within a court where the monarchy was restored, widely feared, and effectively absolute. Henry VIII inherited not merely the throne, but also the invaluable lessons of caution, dominance, and absolute central authority. He would push these lessons to their extreme limits, marrying 6 times, dramatically breaking from the Roman Church, and irrevocably reshaping England's religious landscape forever. It was a reign defined by spectacle and, at times, sheer terror. But its foundational roots were firmly embedded in the fertile soil enriched by the Wars of the Roses, a monarch who perceived himself as divinely appointed but was, in reality, politically engineered. Henry VIII was both a king and the ultimate performance of kingship. And then came Elizabeth, the last Tudor monarch, born of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth I would bear the immense weight of this legacy more than any other. Her path to power was treacherous, marked by executions, profound religious turmoil, and fierce, persistent doubts concerning a woman's inherent ability to rule. But like her grandfather before her, she profoundly understood that stability was not inherited. It was rigorously earned. Elizabeth skillfully employed the lessons of the wars like tools within her political arsenal. She famously never married, thereby shrewdly circumventing the dynastic pitfalls that had tragically destroyed so many before her. She meticulously kept the nobility firmly in check, surrounded herself with unwaveringly loyal advisors, and masterfully honed the art of political theater. Her court became a vibrant locus of intricate ritual and powerful symbolism. Her image meticulously controlled and immortalized in portraits that depicted her as ageless, immensely powerful, and utterly beyond reproach. She transformed herself into the Virgin Queen, the living embodiment of England itself. But even as Elizabeth's reign marked the glorious peak of Tudor stability, it also revealed the long, lingering shadows still cast by the wars. They remind us of the exorbitant price of unrestrained ambition, of loyalty grievously misplaced, and of peace, always far more fragile than we wish to believe. And perhaps most profoundly, they remind us that history is not simply a linear series of battles and treaties. It is an intricate tapestry of choices made in the depths of fear or the heights of courage. Choices that resonate and echo for generations. In the final analysis, the Wars of the Roses were not solely about kings and crowns. They were about a country in the throes of self-discovery. learning who it was and what it was willing to become in order to survive. The majestic halls of power had fallen silent, yet the chilling echoes of ambition continued to haunt every venerable stone. The blood spilled during the Wars of the Roses had long since dried, but its indelible memory continued to stain England's very political soul. Though the Tudors had definitively cemented their nascent dynasty, the profound lessons learned from those brutal decades were far from forgotten. They persisted in hushed whispers at court, in cautious alliances forged from necessity, and in the very way monarchs meticulously thought, ruled, and lived in constant fear. Peace, as they had all learned through bitter experience, was never an inherent, permanent state. It was something you painstakingly forged, diligently protected, and at times, artfully faked. The kingdom had survived profound betrayal, constantly shifting loyalties, and the grotesque spectacle of royal families turning upon each other with the ferocity of rabid dogs. But even as the crown rested more securely upon the Tudor heads, a lingering question persisted in the hearts of England's populace: could it all happen again? Could cousins once more transform into mortal enemies? Could another ambitious Richard, or Edward, or Henry, rise to claim what was not rightfully theirs and plunge the realm back into the suffocating darkness? That haunting question lingered persistently as the Tudors steadily grew in confidence and power. Henry VII had ruled with weary precision. His son, Henry VIII, ruled with thunderous impact. He dramatically broke from Rome, ruthlessly shattered monasteries, and took wives as if attempting to unilaterally rewrite destiny itself. But it was under Elizabeth I that the country truly began to breathe again. Her reign, though meticulously built on pervasive anxiety and intricate political chess, brought a profound sense of English identity and national pride not witnessed since the days before the roses transformed from symbolic flowers into opposing emblems of red and white. Yet, even Elizabeth profoundly understood that beneath her glittering court, replete with music, drama, and poetry, the lingering ghosts of civil war remained. Every decision, every letter dispatched, every strategic alliance forged, was haunted by the chilling knowledge that all it took was one audacious pretender, one charismatic noble with a tenuous claim and a substantial following, to awaken the dormant monster of rebellion. That pervasive fear never quite departed the minds of the ruling elite. One could observe it in the stringent laws enacted to limit noble power, hear it in the fervent sermons extolling the Queen's unassailable legitimacy, and viscerally feel it in the pervasive paranoia that enveloped anyone who dared to speak too loudly of rightful heirs or long-lost princes. The Wars of the Roses had concluded decades prior, yes, but not in spirit. Even among the common people, harrowing stories persisted. Mothers whispered chilling tales to their children about the princes in the Tower. Tavern-goers vehemently debated whether Richard III was truly a villain or merely a convenient scapegoat. The past was a festering wound that had not yet fully scabbed over. England craved not just peace, it lived in profound fear of its antithesis. The trauma of those brutal battles, the pervasive uncertainty of royal favor, and the utter, soul-crushing destruction that inevitably resulted from choosing the wrong side had carved a scar so deep that it profoundly influenced generations who had not even been born when Bosworth Field was drenched in blood. That scar was most palpably visible in how decisively power was centralized. No longer could the great houses maintain private armies, no longer could they rise with impunity. The Tudors had meticulously ensured this. They painstakingly crafted a monarchy that did not simply sit atop a feudal pyramid. It utterly absorbed the pyramid entirely. The monarch was not merely the head of the country. They were, in essence, the country itself. Every rebellion, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was treated as an existential threat. Every noble's loyalty was meticulously bought, constantly monitored, and perpetually questioned. In that profound way, the Wars of the Roses did not merely change rulers. They fundamentally transformed the very nature of the English state. And yet, despite this monumental transformation, England did not lose its innate taste for drama. If anything, it discovered a new and powerful outlet, the stage. William Shakespeare, the son of a modest glove-maker from Stratford-upon-Avon, took the chaotic history of the 15th century and transformed it into tragic, enduring poetry. He portrayed Henry VI as a hapless monarch, brutally pulled apart by the relentless forces of ambition. He fashioned Richard III into a charismatic villain, so captivating that people began to remember him less for his political policies and more for the way he limped across a stage, snarling desperately for a horse. These plays achieved far more than mere entertainment. They profoundly redefined memory. They transformed war into art, treachery into enduring literature, and in doing so, they significantly helped England process a deep-seated trauma that could not be openly discussed in court, or chronicled without severe consequence. The Wars of the Roses had been too chaotic, too painfully destructive, too politically sensitive to be dissected openly. But on the stage, in the realm of fiction, there, at last, it could be made sense of, at least emotionally. If not always historically. It was in those powerful performances, with candlelight flickering across painted faces, that ordinary people began to genuinely engage with their own national story. They began to perceive kings as flawed, vulnerable men, not infallible divine beings. They viewed the crown not as an absolute, inherent right, but as a hard-won prize, frequently fought over and often tragically lost. That burgeoning awareness subtly but profoundly changed something in the prevailing culture. A seed was planted that centuries later would blossom into a more critical view of power, one that questioned divine rule, meticulously examined political legitimacy, and fiercely demanded accountability. But at the time, no one could have possibly guessed just how profoundly influential that war-torn legacy would eventually prove to be. Because even as Elizabeth reigned in glorious splendor, her eventual death without a direct heir brought back an old, persistent fear: succession. Would the next monarch be accepted peacefully? Would England once again descend into the chaos of contested claims and armed camps? When James VI of Scotland peacefully became James I of England, that immediate fear was momentarily quelled. The crown had passed peacefully, and the houses of Lancaster and York were truly behind them now. But the ideological seeds of rebellion, monarchy, and power had already been deeply sown. Within decades, England would face something even more radical than cousin against cousin. It would face Parliament against king, and eventually, it would execute its own monarch. The English Civil War, though born from distinct conditions, was still a reverberating echo of the Wars of the Roses. It was another profound reckoning with power, legitimacy, and the fundamental right to rule. It was yet another attempt to definitively define what England was, who controlled it, and what the crown truly signified. The lines were not drawn by roses this time, but by deeply held beliefs: royalist versus parliamentarian, Anglican versus Puritan. And yet the central conflict was agonizingly familiar. What happens when rulers overreach, when trust is shattered, when the people no longer believe that the crown legitimately wields authority? Even today, the Wars of the Roses continue to shape how we conceptualize leadership, political infighting, succession dramas, and the public's inherent skepticism of power. All of these can trace their echoes back to that brutal chapter in English history. It serves as a potent reminder that democracy and monarchy alike are inherently fragile, easily tipped into chaos when the delicate balance of power is lost or flagrantly abused. Culturally, the war, in essence, never truly ended either. From the sweeping novels of Philippa Gregory to the profound inspiration behind Game of Thrones, the relentless war between Lancaster and York has become a pervasive metaphor for all power struggles. It is now about far more than just history. It is about the inherent nature of ambition, the insidious corruption of ideals, and the devastating cost of claiming something that cannot be peacefully shared. The crown, in its ultimate essence, is not a mere object. It is a powerful symbol of profound burden, of spilled blood, of history itself. And those who wear it, those who ruthlessly fight for it, must always reckon with the haunting ghosts of those who tragically died for it. The Tudors attempted to silence those ghosts. They tried to bury the war with strategic marriages, stringent laws, and carefully constructed myths. But no matter how strenuously one tries, history possesses an uncanny ability to resurface. One cannot destroy the past. One can only learn from it, or be irrevocably doomed to repeat it. So, as we quietly traverse the ancient halls of old castles, as we carefully read the names carved into venerable cathedrals, or gaze upon the crumbling battlefields that once reverberated with the thunder of cannon fire and the charge of cavalry, we are not merely tourists, we are witnesses. Witnesses to a country that almost tore itself asunder over mere lines on a family tree, a country that ultimately chose peace but never, ever forgot the devastating cost of losing it. And in that enduring memory, there lies profound power, not just the power to crown a king, but the power to deeply understand why that crown must never again be worth a war. There are pivotal moments in history when the immense weight of power falls unexpectedly into the hands of the unprepared. When fate bestows a crown upon a person not because of their inherent strength, but simply because of their survival. That is precisely what transpired when Henry Tudor became Henry VII. He was not the strongest claimant to the throne, he was not the most popular contender. But he was the last man standing, and in a land utterly ravaged by decades of brutal civil war. Perhaps that was sufficient. His decisive victory at Bosworth was not merely a triumph of armies, it marked the definitive end of an era, the final bloody chapter in a protracted family feud that had irrevocably reshaped an entire kingdom. But if he harbored the notion that winning the crown would automatically usher in an era of peace, he was profoundly mistaken. Peace is not something a king simply inherits, it is something he must constantly and vigilantly defend. Henry Tudor's reign commenced not on a resplendent throne, but on a blood-soaked battlefield. The lifeless corpse of Richard III lay behind him, and the crown, salvaged from the mud, was solemnly placed upon his head by soldiers. There was no elaborate divine ceremony, no grand procession, just the pervasive smell of blood, the faint cries of the dying, and the heavy, ominous silence that descends when everyone finally realizes the desperate fight is over, for now. He had won, but he keenly understood that many still harbored profound doubts about his right to rule. His claim, after all, originated through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, from the illegitimate Beaufort line, technically legitimized, yes, but in the eyes of many nobles who had shed blood for either York or Lancaster, irrevocably stained. So, from his very first day, Henry ruled with a pervasive fear in his heart, not cowardice, but a deep, intelligent caution. He married Elizabeth of York, not solely for love or for a strategic alliance, but to unite the warring houses, the red and the white roses, finally intertwined not in brutal battle, but in sacred matrimony. Their union birthed the iconic Tudor rose, an elegant symbol that skillfully masked the decades of ingrained hatred and profound suspicion still simmering beneath the surface. Henry understood that he could not rely on mere symbols alone. He had to act swiftly and, at times, harshly. He enacted stringent laws that systematically weakened the great nobles, those who had once audaciously raised private armies to rival kings. He reformed the national finances with an iron grip, ensuring that loyalty was not simply earned through favors, but rigorously enforced through debt and meticulous surveillance. He meticulously constructed a monarchy that constantly watched, rigorously taxed, and anticipated rebellion at every conceivable turn. And yet they persisted, pretenders. Shadows masquerading as rightful claimants, men like Lambert Simnel, a mere boy meticulously trained to impersonate the Earl of Warwick, and Perkin Warbeck, who audaciously claimed he was one of the lost princes in the Tower. These were not merely isolated threats, they were potent symbols of how inherently fragile Henry's rule truly was. Foreign powers discreetly backed them, discontented nobles whispered conspiratorially in the dark. The war, though technically concluded, had not genuinely died, it had merely gone underground. Henry crushed these rebellions with ruthless efficiency, But with every uprising, he grew more suspicious, more deeply paranoid. He meticulously constructed a system of bonds and recognizances, effectively forcing nobles into a state of perpetual financial dependence on the crown. He significantly strengthened the court of Star Chamber, ensuring that justice, or at least royal justice, was swift and unyielding. He governed not with charisma, but with demonstrable results. England did not necessarily love Henry VII, but it certainly feared him, and in the lingering shadow of war, fear would have to suffice. When he passed away in 1509, the country he bequeathed was no longer the feudal battlefield it had once been. It was a centralized monarchy, strong, controlled, but also tightly wound, like a bowstring pulled back and trembling with suppressed energy. And then, into that carefully curated space, stepped Henry VIII, young, charismatic, powerful. Everything his cautious father was not. Where the elder Henry had been reserved and meticulously calculating, his son was bold, impulsive, and consumed by an insatiable obsession with his own legacy. And for a time, it undeniably worked. The people adored him. The nobles rejoiced. Finally, a king who truly looked and acted like a king. But Henry VIII would eventually rule not just with charm, but with unbridled fire. He ruthlessly tore apart the entrenched religious foundations of England to secure a male heir. He married 6 times. He executed those who dared to defy him, whether friend or family. And yet, remarkably, he never faced the kind of civil unrest that had so relentlessly plagued his predecessors. Why? Because his astute father had already broken the nobility's back. Because the Wars of the Roses had imparted a harsh, indelible lesson: never allowed the great houses to become too powerful. Still, the persistent issue of succession relentlessly haunted him. His almost obsessive desire for sons was not mere vanity, it was a profound echo of history. He understood that weak claims inevitably led to chaos, that cousin could turn against cousin, that one disputed inheritance could plunge the entire nation back into the very darkness from which he had been born. His desperation for a male heir was a direct, visceral echo of the war that had so deeply scarred England. And in the end, despite all his strenuous efforts, it was his daughter Elizabeth who would ultimately become the enduring symbol of Tudor greatness. Elizabeth I ruled like someone who profoundly understood just how perilous power could truly be. She famously did not marry, not because she lacked suitors, but because marriage invariably came with inherent risks, with competing claims, with foreign entanglements. She played politics with the meticulous precision of a chess master, skillfully mastering her public image, manipulating intricate court factions, and ruling with an exquisite balance of innate charm and unyielding iron will. She recognized that as a woman on the throne, she had to be smarter, sharper, and far more calculating than any man. But more than that, she intimately knew what civil war truly looked like. She had witnessed it up close. Her childhood was haunted by executions, imprisonments, and profound betrayals. She ruled not merely as a monarch, but as a survivor. Under Elizabeth's astute reign, England dramatically flourished. The Renaissance blossomed, audacious exploration commenced, and the arts thrived. But even in this golden age, the persistent threat of internal collapse ominously loomed. Catholic plots, perennial questions of legitimacy, and the pervasive fear of foreign invasion meant her reign was a constant tightrope walk. And when she died childless in 1603, the country once again braced itself for uncertainty. The crown peacefully passed to James VI of Scotland, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland in a remarkable display of continuity. But the deeper issues remained unresolved. Who truly possessed the right to rule? What was the fundamental role of Parliament? What happened when the king and his subjects profoundly disagreed? These were questions that had never been fully answered during the Wars of the Roses, and soon they would explode again, this time in a new and different war, the English Civil War. But even centuries later, the haunting echoes of the Wars of the Roses can still be palpably felt in our enduring fascination with power, in our inherent suspicion of authority, in our love of drama, betrayal, and unexpected victories. It is no mere accident that the most popular modern fantasy epic, Game of Thrones, drew directly and heavily from these historical conflicts. The pervasive idea of noble houses perpetually locked in endless battle, of alliances meticulously formed and then brutally broken, of kings dramatically rising and falling, of innocent children paying the ultimate price for their parents' ambitions, it is not merely fiction, it is, at its core, profound history. And it all commenced with two symbolic roses. In the final analysis, the Wars of the Roses were far more than a mere conflict over a coveted crown. They represented a profound transformation. A crucible that melted down the old order and meticulously reshaped England into something new, stronger, colder, and far more acutely aware of what it truly meant to wield power and the devastating cost of its loss. The blood spilled during those tumultuous years fertilized the very roots of a nation that would go on to profoundly shape the world. But it also left an enduring warning. Carved deep into the very soul of English identity, never take stability for granted, never forget how perilously close the kingdom came to utterly destroying itself. And never assume peace is permanent, because all it takes is one claim, one unchecked ambition, one single spark, and the war begins anew. The concluding chapters of the Wars of the Roses were not marked by epic battles or roaring armies, but by a pervasive silence, a silence that settled over England like a heavy fog after a storm. The bloodshed had finally ceased, but the haunting memory of war lingered in every castle corridor, in every noble whisper, in every stringent law passed by a cautious monarch. The protracted conflict had irrevocably reshaped the kingdom, its politics, its people, its very sense of identity. And while the Tudors now reigned from a throne meticulously forged by both hard-won victory and astute compromise, the true story was not simply about kings and crowns. It was about profound survival. About how a nation painstakingly rebuilt itself from the ashes and learned to fear its own tumultuous history. In many significant ways, England under the early Tudors was a land perpetually haunted by lingering ghosts. Every village, every manor, carried its own grim stories of sons who had departed for war and tragically never returned, of loyalties irrevocably torn apart, of estates lost and gained through constantly shifting allegiances. Entire families had been utterly erased from the historical record, others had risen to prominence overnight. The very concept of nobility had been broken and remade, its foundation resting not solely on birthright, but on cunning and brutal pragmatism. Those who survived had done so not through chivalrous valor, but through astute strategy. And now, in the fragile calm that followed the devastating storm, they found themselves collectively asking, "What now?" Henry VII had indeed won the war, but he understood, better than anyone, that the hard-won peace was inherently fragile. He did not rule like a triumphant hero basking in glory. He ruled like a man perpetually watching every shadow. His court was not filled with joyous celebration, but with meticulous calculation. Every noble was a potential traitor, every foreign visitor a potential threat. He did not lavish titles or lands indiscriminately. He demanded absolute loyalty. He skillfully employed financial penalties, legal traps, and a pervasive network of spies to keep the once powerful barons firmly in check. And as the years slowly passed, something peculiar began to happen. England grew quiet, not in a joyful, celebratory way, but in a tense, cautious one. The chaos had ended, but at what profound cost? For the common people, life continued, hard yet more predictable. No longer were villages forcibly emptied by levies to fight in a cousin's war. No longer did ominous banners appear on the horizon, signaling that their town was about to become a bloody battlefield. Harvests still occasionally failed, taxes still stung, but at least the enemy was no longer necessarily their neighbor. A new kind of order began to emerge, and with it came a slow, steady rebuilding. Not just of physical infrastructure, but of trust, of institutions, and of the very essence of what it meant to be English. Education began to take root in new ways. The printing press had arrived. And books slowly, but steadily, crept into cities and towns, bringing with them new and revolutionary ideas. Trade expanded. Merchants, no longer paralyzed by the fear that their goods would be looted by wandering armies, began to invest with newfound confidence. London swelled in population, guilds grew stronger. And for the first time in generations, people began to look forward rather than simply sideways, constantly wondering who might betray them next. This was not yet a golden age, but it was undoubtedly the nascent beginning of something significant. Still, beneath it all, the fear stubbornly remained, the deep-seated fear that the wars could tragically return. That another false claimant might rise, that some ambitious noble might perceive weakness in the crown and rekindle the old, destructive fires. So, even as peace stretched into decades, the monarchy ruled with one eye perpetually open. The Tudors masterfully honed the art of symbolism. They saturated the country with powerful imagery, the intertwined red and white rose. The enduring Tudor rose appeared in every church, on every official document. The message was unmistakably clear. We are the Union. We are the end of war. But history possesses an uncanny habit of resisting absolute closure. Even after the deaths of Henry VII and later Henry VIII, the deep scars of civil war continued to profoundly influence every subsequent decision. The dramatic break from Rome, for instance, was not merely about religion or marital desire. It was fundamentally about control. Henry VIII could not afford a pope who might support a rival claim to the throne. The ruthless dissolution of the monasteries was not solely about wealth. It was about systematically eliminating power centers that lay outside direct royal control. Everything the Tudors undertook was filtered through the pervasive lens of survival, of meticulously preventing another catastrophic descent into chaos. And then came the Elizabethan era, a glorious period of bold exploration, artistic bloom, and profound national pride. But it was also a time marked by constant, lurking paranoia. Elizabeth I, though remembered today as one of England's greatest monarchs, lived her reign perpetually surrounded by plots and threats, many of them rooted in lingering questions of legitimacy and rival claims. Her government was an intricate web of spies and informants. She trusted few, and she executed many. Because she profoundly understood what her grandfather had taught by brutal example, it only takes one spark to reignite the war. And what of the nobility, the families that had once proudly marched under banners of red or white? Some faded into obscurity, their lines broken, their lands seized. Others artfully reinvented themselves. They became bureaucrats, courtiers, advisors. They traded their swords for ledgers, their loyalty no longer to a mere house or a bloodline, but to the crown itself. The very concept of feudalism, the old system of lords and vassals, quietly crumbled. In its place rose something new, a central state, a burgeoning bureaucracy, a unified nation. But something was also irrevocably lost, the romanticized allure of knightly valor, the naive idea of honor in politics. The Wars of the Roses had brutally demonstrated that such notions were mere illusions, that behind every chivalric tale lay a grim trail of broken promises and countless dead men. That true power came not to the noble-minded, but to the cunning. This New England, meticulously shaped by the Tudors, was undeniably smarter, more controlled, but also colder, less idealistic, and in many profound ways more dangerous. Because the haunting memory of war lingered like a persistent ghost, it whispered through the corridors of power, it reminded every monarch, every politician, of what could transpire if order slipped. And so, repression became the default. Dissent was simply not tolerated. Religion, politics, speech, all were tightly managed. The wars had taught the lesson well. Unchecked freedom could utterly tear a country apart. And yet, that very memory also became a source of profound strength. England would not be caught off guard again. It would not splinter. The scars became armor. The trauma became fuel. When foreign powers threatened invasion, when new ideologies insidiously crept in from the continent, when revolution stirred in the very air, England remembered, and it stood firm. Centuries passed, new dynasties rose. New wars came, but none were quite like the Wars of the Roses. Because those wars had been deeply personal, family against family, brother against brother. They had been fundamentally about identity, legacy, and raw survival. And though England would fight again, against Spain, against France, even against itself in later civil wars, those later conflicts were fundamentally different. They were about ideas, religion, class. The Wars of the Roses had been about blood, and that is precisely why they continue to fascinate, because they feel so raw, so viscerally human. They weren't merely political, they were profoundly emotional. The decisions made during those decades were not cold, calculated maneuvers. They were desperate acts of revenge, born of jealousy, fear, or even love. And so, centuries later, they continue to speak to us. We see ourselves in them, in the flawed kings, in the ambitious queens, in the soldiers who marched without fully understanding why, in the ordinary people who simply yearned to live. The story did not end with Bosworth. It did not end with the Tudors. It lives on in literature, in film, in every fictional tale of noble houses and hidden heirs, of profound betrayals and unexpected victories. The Wars of the Roses may be history, but their essence is timeless, because at their core, they pose a fundamental question that every generation must confront. What are we truly willing to do for power, and what happens when we win? That is the enduring legacy, that is the solemn warning, that is the stark truth behind the Roses. Centuries have elapsed since the last swords clashed in the tumultuous Wars of the Roses. Yet the haunting echoes of that turbulent era continue to ripple profoundly through modern England. Beneath the polished surface of the nation's culture, intricate politics, enduring literature, and even its physical geography, lie the indelible fingerprints of a war waged not merely for a crown, but for the very soul of a kingdom. It is not merely a chapter confined to history books. It is a foundational trauma that irrevocably reshaped England's core identity and persistently whispers through its institutions and collective imagination. Wander through the ancient, winding streets of London or York, and you will invariably encounter potent symbols, roses meticulously carved into weathered stone, ancient house sigils adorning venerable buildings, Tudor emblems intricately woven into university seals, and royal crests proudly displayed in grand cathedrals. They are not mere decorative flourishes, they are quiet yet powerful reminders, symbols explicitly designed to convey: we remember, we survived, we changed. For England, the profound legacy of the Wars of the Roses resides not solely in the history that was meticulously written, but in the very identity that was painstakingly constructed. That identity is complex, meticulously forged in a crucible of contradictions, a nation that deeply values stability yet once brutally tore itself apart in a dynastic blood feud. A monarchy that prides itself on unbroken lineage and time-honored tradition, yet whose very survival came through the shattering of that same lineage. A people fundamentally shaped by loyalty and honor, yet descendants of an era where pervasive betrayal was as common as breath. This inherent duality stubbornly remains embedded within the British psyche, a persistent tension between profound reverence for the past and a weary apprehension of unchecked power. Even the modern monarchy, today, carries distinct echoes of those wars. The contemporary House of Windsor may appear far removed from the chaotic maelstrom of the 15th century, but its very roots were definitively stabilized by the outcome of the Tudor consolidation of power. Henry VII's meticulous orchestration of peace painstakingly laid the groundwork for an idea that would evolve over time, the profound notion of a monarchy that survives not by divine right alone, but by astute political skill, careful public perception, and unwavering national unity. That fundamental idea persists today, with the royal family serving more as symbolic figureheads than sovereign rulers, yet no less intricately tied to its own compelling history of survival. Beyond the sacred institution of the throne, the legacy profoundly lives on in English governance. The brutal, unforgettable lessons of civil war taught England the inherent dangers of factionalism, of overmighty subjects, and of rival power centers. And so, over subsequent centuries, a system was meticulously developed, not overnight, but through arduous trial and error, that gradually limited royal authority and systematically expanded the vital role of Parliament. It was not always a smooth transition. England would endure further turmoil, including the English Civil War and the eventual execution of a king. But the Wars of the Roses planted the seminal seed of a vital, transformative realization. Power must be meticulously balanced, or chaos will inevitably return. The deep scars of the conflict also powerfully inspired one of the richest literary traditions in all of history. Shakespeare's history plays, penned more than a century after the wars, meticulously helped to cement the Wars of the Roses firmly within the cultural consciousness. Through masterful dramatization, he transformed the chaotic reality of dynastic conflict into timeless narratives of ambition, inescapable fate, and profound tragedy. Audiences today still avidly watch Henry VI and Richard III. Not merely for entertainment, but because they tap into something universal and deeply human. Shakespeare did not invent the inherent drama of that period. He brilliantly revealed it. He profoundly understood that the Wars of the Roses were not solely a political struggle, but a deeply psychological one, encompassing fear, pride, paranoia, and pervasive grief. And that enduring drama did not cease with Shakespeare. The vivid imagery of the Wars of the Roses has been relentlessly revived time and again. From sweeping historical novels to popular modern television series. When viewers eagerly tune into stories like Game of Thrones, they are witnessing profound reflections of York and Lancaster. Of feuding houses, of powerful lords relentlessly vying for power, of meticulously formed alliances shattered overnight. George R.R. Martin famously drew significant inspiration from the Wars of the Roses when meticulously constructing his own sprawling fictional dynastic saga. And audiences responded with fervent enthusiasm. Not solely because it was dramatic, but because it felt viscerally true. Deep down, we instinctively recognize the story, we've heard its echoes before. That powerful sense of recognition extends beyond the realm of mere fiction. In times of political instability, pundits and commentators still frequently invoke the Wars of the Roses as a compelling metaphor. When political parties fracture, or royal scandals erupt, when succession becomes shrouded in uncertainty, or factions begin to form, the lingering ghosts of the past are summoned, not always explicitly, but they undeniably linger. The unsettling idea that things could spiral again, that England could once more be plunged into turmoil over power and legacy, is never dismissed lightly. The wars may be history, but the profound instinct they awakened, the deep-seated fear of collapse, the pervasive craving for order, stubbornly remains. Even the very landscape carries the indelible memory. The battlefields remain, now quiet fields and gentle hills, subtly marked by plaques and solemn memorial stones. Tourists walk across Towton, Bosworth, Barnet, not as soldiers, but as curious onlookers, meticulously retracing the paths of history. Local legends persist, ghost stories, enduring myths passed down through countless generations. A farmer in Yorkshire might still recount tales of bones once unearthed by the plough. A child in Warwickshire might learn about the white boar of Richard III, not in school, but as a bedtime story. The past resolutely refuses to fade. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is far subtler, a pervasive national skepticism, a deep weariness of concentrated power, an ingrained discomfort with political extremism. England emerged from the Wars of the Roses not with an innate love for monarchy, but with a practical, sober appreciation for its inherent dangers. That does not imply that the English became cynical or overtly rebellious, but they undeniably became cautious. And that deeply ingrained caution became an integral part of their political DNA. It manifests in parliamentary procedure, in the slow and meticulously deliberate nature of reforms. It appears in the national character, a pronounced preference for compromise, for unwavering stability, for assiduously avoiding radical shifts. England transformed into a nation of hedgers and negotiators, not solely out of cultural preference, but out of hard-earned, bitter experience. When you have personally witnessed what unbridled ambition and noble rivalry can inflict upon a kingdom, you learn to tread with extreme care. And so, in a strange yet profound twist, the profound violence of the past inadvertently created a culture of peace, or at least a culture that deeply values peace. It rendered England not just wary of internal conflict, but fiercely determined to prevent its recurrence. That unwavering determination shaped its foreign policy, it shaped the methodical development of law. And it shaped how the English fundamentally perceived themselves, not merely as subjects of a ruler, but as active participants in a national project that demanded balance and judicious restraint. Of course, history is never static. Modern England confronts new challenges, new divisions, new uncertainties. But the profound memory of the Wars of the Roses, if not in excruciating detail then in enduring spirit, remains profoundly relevant, because it serves as a powerful reminder of what can transpire when ambition goes unchecked. When legitimacy is relentlessly contested, when identity itself tragically transforms into a battleground. In the ultimate analysis, the legacy of the Wars of the Roses is not simply about who triumphed or who reigned. It is about what it profoundly taught a nation, that power is inherently fragile. That history is not an inevitable, predetermined path, that peace must be diligently guarded, never merely assumed, and that the past is never as distant as we optimistically believe. The Wars of the Roses left an indelible mark on the political landscape of England, fundamentally reshaping the monarchy and the very fabric of governance. This brutal dynastic conflict was not merely a series of battles for power. It was a transformational period that irrevocably redefined royal authority and meticulously set the stage for the modern British monarchy. The conflict vividly demonstrated the inherent fragility of hereditary claims and the perilous dangers of unchecked aristocratic ambition, ultimately forcing a profound rethinking of how power was exercised and meticulously maintained. One of the most significant and far-reaching consequences was the definitive end of the Plantagenet dynasty, which had proudly ruled England for over 3 centuries. The protracted reign of the Plantagenets, notoriously marked by persistent internal strife and costly external wars, came to a violent and conclusive end as the Lancastrian and Yorkist branches relentlessly destroyed each other in a relentless cycle of vengeance and rivalry. The decisive victory of Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth field in 1485 not only brought an end to the fighting but also ushered in a new dynasty, the Tudors, to the throne. This profound change was far more than a simple transfer of power. It marked the auspicious birth of an entirely new era in English monarchy. Henry VII's reign unequivocally marked the beginning of a centralized monarchy that rigorously sought to curb the entrenched power of the nobility, who had been the primary driving force behind the destructive Wars of the Roses. The great lords had audaciously amassed vast private armies and wielded tremendous influence, frequently challenging royal authority and inexorably dragging the kingdom into chaos. Henry acutely understood that to meticulously prevent a recurrence of civil war, he needed to significantly reduce their military and political power. He diligently pursued policies that systematically weakened the nobility's grip, including strictly limiting their ability to raise private armies and meticulously managing marriages and inheritances to skillfully avoid the dangerous concentration of land and power. This shrewd approach extended far beyond mere military restrictions. Henry Tudor and later his formidable granddaughter Elizabeth I adeptly utilized the tools of statecraft, such as the courts, taxation, and careful patronage, to rigorously enforce royal authority and painstakingly build a more professional and efficient government. The Tudor monarchs meticulously developed a bureaucracy that was unswervingly loyal to the crown, not to local lords, thereby ensuring that governance was more uniform and significantly less susceptible to disruptive local rebellions. This pivotal shift was crucial in transforming England from a feudal society, where local power was paramount and often unruly, into a centralized state firmly governed by a strong monarchy. The Tudor dynasty also labored assiduously to legitimize their rule through potent symbolism and pervasive propaganda. Henry VII meticulously married Elizabeth of York, strategically uniting the feuding houses of Lancaster and York, thereby symbolically ending the Civil War and formally establishing the Tudor rose as the new emblem of the monarchy. This strategic union was not merely political but profoundly psychological, meticulously designed to heal deep wounds and assiduously promote national unity. It was a masterful stroke of astute political theater that significantly helped to solidify the Tudor claim and finally bring a measure of much-needed peace to a profoundly fractured realm. Beyond the intricate realm of politics, the aftermath of the Wars of the Roses had profound and lasting effects on society and culture. The war had brutally devastated large swathes of the country, severely disrupted trade, and caused widespread suffering. The nobility's incessant power struggles had frequently come at the direct expense of the common people, who bore the brunt of heavy taxation and widespread conscription. The Tudor monarchs, acutely aware of this, diligently worked to restore economic stability and actively encourage growth. They shrewdly promoted trade and ambitious exploration, which meticulously laid the crucial groundwork for England's later, dramatic expansion into a formidable global empire. The social upheaval also led to subtle but profoundly important changes in the English class system. The pervasive decline of the old aristocracy's entrenched dominance opened up significant opportunities for the gentry and burgeoning merchant classes to rise in prominence. This pivotal shift in power dynamics fundamentally contributed to the gradual emergence of a more modern society, where wealth and influence were no longer solely inherited but could be assiduously earned through diligent commerce and dedicated service to the crown. This evolving social structure meticulously set the stage for England's profound transformation during the Glorious Renaissance and far beyond. The legal system also underwent significant evolution in the post-war period. The chaos and instability of the Wars of the Roses had starkly exposed the inherent weaknesses of medieval law, particularly the immense challenges in rigorously enforcing royal justice over powerful and often unruly nobles. The Tudors meticulously strengthened the court system, significantly expanded the vital role of common law, and innovatively introduced new legal institutions to bring about greater consistency and inherent fairness. These far-reaching reforms helped to firmly establish the rule of law as a foundational cornerstone of English governance, a fundamental principle that continues to be central to the British legal tradition today. Another enduring legacy was the changing and increasingly important role of Parliament. During the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, Parliament had been convened irregularly and frequently served as a mere tool for whichever faction held temporary power. But the inherent instability vividly demonstrated the urgent need for a more reliable and representative body to effectively advise the monarch and legitimately sanction laws and taxes. Over time, the Tudor monarchs meticulously increased the frequency of parliamentary sessions and formally recognized its growing importance in governance. This crucial evolution meticulously laid the foundation for the eventual development of constitutional monarchy and the ultimate rise of parliamentary democracy. Religion also played a subtle yet profoundly important role in shaping the post-war monarchy. The Wars of the Roses occurred on the very eve of the Reformation, and the Tudor dynasty would later skillfully harness religious reform to significantly strengthen royal authority. Henry VIII's dramatic break with the Roman Catholic Church and the subsequent establishment of the Church of England was a decisive and audacious move that not only irrevocably altered the religious landscape, but also significantly increased the power of the monarchy by placing the king at the undisputed head of the national church. This bold redefinition of religious authority had deep, foundational roots in the meticulous political consolidation that began in the immediate wake of the Wars of the Roses. Culturally, the wars inspired a rich and enduring legacy of art, literature, and folklore. The compelling stories of brave knights, tragic betrayals, and dramatic battles became deeply embedded in England's cultural memory. This era's compelling tales were tirelessly retold in plays, poems, and chronicles that profoundly shaped the nation's self-understanding. The impact on literature was profound, with seminal works like Shakespeare's history plays elevating the events into timeless narratives about power, fate, and the complexities of human nature. Even today, the Wars of the Roses continue to captivate historians, writers, and the public alike. Museums, historical reenactments, and documentaries diligently keep the memory alive, serving as powerful reminders of a tumultuous time when England's very future hung precariously in the balance. The vital lessons learned from this brutal chapter in history, about leadership, legitimacy, and the devastating costs of division, remain profoundly relevant, offering invaluable insights into the enduring challenges of governance and the inherent fragility of peace. In summary, the Wars of the Roses were far more than a bloody dynastic struggle. They were a profound crucible that fundamentally transformed England's monarchy and its entire political system. They starkly exposed the inherent dangers of aristocratic power, particularly when unchecked by a strong central authority, and meticulously paved the way for a new, emergent kind of monarchy, one that skillfully balanced royal prerogative with evolving ideas of governance and a more coherent legal framework. The Tudors' remarkable ability to consolidate power, legitimately assert their rule, and diligently foster national unity was forged directly from the ashes of this protracted conflict, meticulously setting England on a clear path toward modern statehood. The haunting echoes of the Wars of the Roses ripple through time, profoundly influencing everything from fundamental political structures to intricate cultural identities. The challenging transition from feudal chaos to centralized authority was neither easy nor immediate, but it was undeniably profound. It irrevocably shaped the monarchy's evolution, England's social fabric, and the very notion of what it truly meant to be an English kingdom. The enduring legacy of the wars stands as a powerful testament to the inherent resilience of a nation that endured its darkest days and emerged fundamentally transformed, forever carrying the invaluable lessons of its past into the uncertain future. The Wars of the Roses was a deeply complex conflict that profoundly shaped not only the political landscape of England but also its fundamental social and cultural identity for generations to come. Following the triumphant rise of the Tudor dynasty, England confronted the enormous and daunting task of healing a deeply fractured kingdom and meticulously rebuilding trust between the crown and its subjects. This pivotal period was characterized by cautious political maneuvering, subtle yet impactful reforms, and a delicate, precarious balance of power, as the new rulers diligently sought to secure their firm hold on the throne while simultaneously preventing the catastrophic return of factional violence. Henry VII, the astute first Tudor king, acutely understood that mere outright military dominance would not suffice to sustain his protracted rule. His formative experience as an exiled claimant had profoundly taught him the paramount importance of consolidating power through strategic political marriages, meticulously forged alliances, and far-reaching legal reforms. He shrewdly married Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the long-feuding houses of Lancaster and York, creating a powerful symbolic end to the brutal civil wars that had so relentlessly ravaged England. This marriage was far more than a mere union of two individuals. It was a deliberate and calculated political act, explicitly aimed at healing deep-seated wounds and meticulously presenting a united front to the entire realm. Yet, beneath the polished surface, underlying tensions stubbornly persisted. The fresh scars of war remained palpable in the memories of many nobles and common folk alike. Henry VII's reign was notoriously marked by constant vigilance against insidious plots and burgeoning rebellions orchestrated by lingering Yorkist loyalists, many of whom still harbored aspirations to challenge the nascent Tudor claim. To counteract these pervasive threats, Henry meticulously established an extensive network of spies and informants, leveraging intelligence to preemptively and decisively suppress dissent. His reign was also profoundly characterized by the careful and strategic use of patronage, generously rewarding loyal supporters with valuable titles and extensive lands, thereby inextricably binding them to the crown's paramount interests. One of Henry's most significant and enduring achievements was the far-reaching reform of the royal finances. The Wars of the Roses had left the crown deeply in debt, and Henry's meticulous fiscal policies painstakingly helped to restore economic stability. He dramatically improved the efficiency of tax collection and vigorously curbed the rampant corruption that had plagued the government for decades. This profound financial prudence not only significantly strengthened the monarchy but also enabled crucial investments in vital infrastructure, such as the improvement of roads and fortifications, which further enhanced royal authority and control across the realm. Despite his remarkable success in consolidating power, Henry VII's reign was not entirely without controversy. His strategic use of the legal system to target political opponents, often through specious charges of treason or the manipulative exploitation of inheritance laws, earned him a complex reputation for being both remarkably shrewd and undeniably ruthless. The Star Chamber, a secretive court famously utilized to try nobles and rigorously enforce royal justice, became a formidable tool to intimidate and meticulously control potential rivals. While these stringent measures undeniably stabilized the kingdom, they also sowed nascent seeds of fear and lingering resentment among the aristocracy. The Tudor dynasty's profound legacy extended far beyond Henry VII. His formidable son, Henry VIII, would dramatically reshape England in ways that extended well beyond the immediate aftermath of the Wars of the Roses. Henry VIII's transformative reign witnessed the dramatic dissolution of the monasteries, the formal establishment of the Church of England, and sweeping, radical changes to both religious and political life. These audacious actions were, in part, a direct extension of the broader Tudor strategy to centralize power and systematically reduce the entrenched influence of competing authorities, whether they were noble or ecclesiastical. Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's brilliant daughter, further solidified the Tudor legacy by reigning during a period of relative peace and magnificent cultural flourishing. Her reign witnessed the decisive defeat of the Spanish Armada, the ambitious expansion of English trade and exploration, and a magnificent renaissance in the arts. Elizabeth skillfully balanced the demanding needs of different religious factions and expertly navigated the complex politics of Europe, meticulously maintaining England's vital independence and significantly strengthening the monarchy's international prestige. The wars had enduring effects on the nobility as well. Many ancient noble houses were tragically extinguished or severely weakened, their vast lands confiscated or strategically redistributed. This profound decline in aristocratic power shifted the balance decisively toward a more centralized monarchy, and a steadily growing class of gentry who diligently served the crown in crucial administrative and military roles. The social mobility that emerged in this pivotal period meticulously laid the groundwork for England's gradual, yet profound, transition from a feudal society to an early modern state. The cultural impact of the Wars of the Roses also cannot be overstated. The inherent drama, profound betrayal, and compelling heroism of this turbulent time inspired countless works of literature and art. William Shakespeare's seminal history plays, including Henry VI and Richard III, immortalized the conflict and its key figures, profoundly shaping how future generations would understand and remember the era. These plays brought the complex political intrigues and human tragedies of the Wars of the Roses vividly to life, rendering the events accessible and deeply engaging to audiences centuries later. Moreover, the war's enduring legacy significantly influenced the development of English identity. The conflict powerfully highlighted the inherent dangers of divided loyalties and the pressing need for a unified national purpose. In the aftermath, the monarchy became an impotent symbol of national unity and unwavering stability, serving as a powerful rallying point for a kingdom desperately seeking peace after decades of unrelenting bloodshed. The Tudor rose, skillfully combining the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster, became a powerful and pervasive emblem of this newfound unity. Despite the profound consolidation of power under the Tudors, the lessons of the Wars of the Roses continued to echo persistently throughout English history. The delicate balance between royal authority and noble privilege remained a central and often contentious tension, profoundly shaping political debates for centuries. The recurrent conflicts between the Crown and Parliament, the gradual rise of constitutional monarchy, and the eventual English Civil War all found their foundational roots in the unresolved issues of governance and power that the Wars of the Roses had so starkly exposed. At the heart of this enduring legacy was the crucial recognition that the monarchy needed to be both inherently strong and remarkably adaptable. The Wars of the Roses had vividly demonstrated the devastating consequences of weak or fiercely contested leadership. The Tudors responded by meticulously crafting a monarchy that was not only inherently powerful but also demonstrably capable of managing the complex and evolving demands of a rapidly changing society. This crucial adaptability significantly helped England navigate the tumultuous waters of religious reform, profound economic change, and intricate international conflict in the years that followed. In conclusion, the post-war period of the Wars of the Roses was a time of monumental transformation and painstaking rebuilding. The Tudors' rise to power marked the definitive end of one era and the auspicious beginning of another, as England inexorably transitioned from medieval chaos towards centralized statehood. Through astute political savvy, far-reaching legal reform, and profound cultural renewal, the Tudors painstakingly forged a legacy that would profoundly shape English history for centuries to come. The haunting echoes of this era continue to resonate, serving as powerful reminders of the enduring challenges of leadership, the complex nature of legitimacy, and the vital importance of national unity in the face of deep division and profound strife. After the tumultuous decades of devastating civil war that had shattered the nobility and ravaged the countryside, the late 15th century ushered in a period of cautious optimism and painstaking rebuilding under the newly established Tudor monarchy. The Wars of the Roses had concluded with Henry Tudor's decisive victory at Bosworth Field, and with it came a profound transformation not only in governance, but in the very fabric of English society. This era marked the slow but inexorable emergence of England from medieval feudal chaos into a more centralized, modern state. One of the most significant and daunting challenges confronting the Tudors was the monumental task of restoring trust. Decades of constantly shifting alliances, profound betrayals, and bloody battles had left deep and enduring scars among both the aristocracy and the common people alike. Families that had once commanded vast estates and wielded immense power were either utterly wiped out or severely weakened, while others had switched sides with such frequency that loyalty itself became deeply suspect. Henry VII, the sagacious founder of the Tudor dynasty, keenly understood that consolidating his rule demanded far more than mere military strength. It necessitated an entirely new approach to governance, legitimacy, and effective control. Central to this profound transformation was the Tudor approach to the nobility. Unlike previous monarchs who had largely relied on the raw power of noble families to enforce their will, Henry VII and his successors rigorously sought to curtail the independent power of the aristocracy. Through comprehensive legal reforms, strategic marriages, and the meticulous distribution of royal patronage, the Tudors aimed to bind the nobility more intimately to the crown. The archaic feudal loyalties, which had so profusely fueled much of the violence during the Wars of the Roses, were gradually and systematically replaced with a more modern system of service and unwavering loyalty directly to the monarch. Henry VII's astute use of the Court of Star Chamber vividly exemplified this pivotal shift. This secretive court became a powerful and fearsome instrument for effectively controlling unruly nobles by trying cases of corruption, rebellion, and even minor offenses. It delivered an unmistakable message: the king was the ultimate, undisputed source of justice, and no noble, regardless of rank, was above the law. While these stringent measures undeniably stabilized the kingdom, they also generated significant resentment among some aristocrats who perceived their traditional privileges eroding. Yet, the Tudor monarchy's firm and unwavering grip on law and order ultimately played a crucial role in preventing the catastrophic recurrence of open civil war. Financially, the Tudors proved remarkably astute. The The Wars of the Roses had left England's treasury severely depleted, and Henry VII meticulously undertook painstaking measures to replenish royal coffers. By significantly improving tax collection systems and vigorously reducing pervasive corruption, he ensured the crown's finances were secure and robust. This profound fiscal discipline enabled the monarchy to maintain a standing army, support a steadily growing bureaucracy, and crucially invest in vital infrastructure projects like roads and bridges. These developments further strengthened the king's inherent ability to project power across the entire realm, moving England ever closer to a modern, centralized state. The Tudor dynasty also profoundly reshaped England's religious landscape, a transformation that played a significant role in further consolidating royal power. Henry VIII's dramatic break with the Roman Catholic Church and the subsequent establishment of the Church of England was not merely a theological dispute, but a meticulously calculated political move. By formally declaring himself the supreme head of the Church in England, Henry VIII effectively wrested control away from the Pope and the traditional Catholic hierarchy. This pivotal shift allowed the crown to seize vast church lands and wealth, which were then strategically redistributed to loyal nobles and gentry, further tightening the monarchy's grip on power. Religious upheaval, however, inevitably brought new challenges. The dissolution of monasteries and the introduction of Protestant reforms provoked widespread unrest and open rebellion, particularly in regions deeply loyal to traditional Catholic traditions. The Tudors responded with a measured combination of military force and astute political diplomacy to effectively suppress dissent and ensure the acceptance of the new religious order. Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's remarkable daughter, masterfully perfected the art of religious compromise, skillfully balancing Protestant and Catholic factions through meticulous legislation and astute political maneuvering. Her reign blossomed into a golden age of relative peace, magnificent cultural flourishing, and profound national pride. The wars also dramatically accelerated social change. The profound weakening of the old nobility opened significant opportunities for the rise of the gentry and merchant classes. These burgeoning groups increasingly assumed crucial roles in local administration, law, and commerce, painstakingly laying the foundation for England's rapidly growing middle class. This pivotal shift altered the traditional social hierarchy and crucially helped to stimulate economic growth, burgeoning urbanization, and the significant expansion of trade. England was steadily transforming into a nation not solely governed by inherited privilege, but increasingly influenced by wealth, education, and dedicated service to the crown. Culturally, the Tudor period witnessed a magnificent renaissance in arts, literature, and learning. The pervasive trauma of civil war gave way to an explosive outpouring of artistic and literary expression. The monarchy became generous patrons of the arts, sponsoring talented painters, visionary architects, and brilliant playwrights who produced enduring works that celebrated both England's complex history and its hopeful, burgeoning future. William Shakespeare and his brilliant contemporaries drew profound inspiration from the Wars of the Roses, dramatizing the intense power struggles and deeply human dramas of the period in plays that continue to resonate powerfully centuries later. These cultural works effectively helped to forge a coherent national identity, creating a shared narrative that celebrated unity and the invaluable lessons gleaned from history. Internationally, the Tudors confidently expanded England's horizons. Freed from debilitating internal conflict, the country began to engage more aggressively in complex European diplomacy and ambitious exploration. The Tudor navy was significantly strengthened, meticulously paving the way for ambitious overseas expeditions and the eventual establishment of colonies. The decisive defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 under Elizabeth I was a crowning achievement that powerfully symbolized England's emergence as a major European power. These profound developments meticulously laid the groundwork for England's dramatic rise as a formidable global empire in the centuries to come. Despite these remarkable successes, the haunting legacy of the Wars of the Roses remained a persistent shadow over Tudor England. The inherent dynastic insecurity that had caused so much bloodshed lingered, profoundly influencing royal marriages, meticulous succession planning, and the intricate dynamics of court politics for generations. Henry's multiple marriages and the turbulent succession that followed starkly underscored the fragile nature of the Tudor claim. The eventual transition to the Stuart dynasty in the early 17th century would inevitably reopen old wounds, leading to new conflicts between monarchy and parliament that echoed the struggles of the past. The powerful symbolism of the Wars of the Roses endured in English heraldry and culture. The Tudor rose, skillfully combining the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster, became a powerful and enduring emblem of reconciliation and profound national unity. This potent symbol served as a constant reminder to the English people of both the horrors of deep division and the inestimable value of hard-won peace, serving as a perpetual reminder of their shared history and the fragile peace that had been so arduously won. In many ways, the Wars of the Roses served as a profound crucible that forged modern England. They starkly exposed the inherent vulnerabilities of feudal fragmentation and powerfully highlighted the absolute necessity of strong, centralized governance. The Tudors' decisive responses, comprehensive legal reform, rigorous control over the nobility, profound religious restructuring, and generous cultural patronage, meticulously set the stage for England's dramatic rise as a unified, powerful nation. These far-reaching changes paved the way for the ultimate development of constitutional monarchy, parliamentary government, and the ambitious expansion of English influence around the world. Reflecting on this pivotal period, it becomes abundantly clear that the Wars of the Roses were far more than a mere series of battles over the throne. They represented a profound transformation of England's political, social, and cultural landscape. The conflict challenged old loyalties, systematically destroyed ancient power structures, and imperatively demanded new forms of decisive leadership. The Tudors emerged not simply as victors of war but as the visionary architects of a new order, one that would definitively shape England's future for centuries to come. The period following the Wars of the Roses was a time of immense change and fundamental redefinition for England. The Tudor dynasty had indeed secured its throne, but the country was still grappling with the profound and pervasive effects of decades of debilitating civil strife. The war had left deep and festering wounds, both physical and psychological, etched into the very fabric of society, and the arduous task of healing these wounds required far more than mere peace. It demanded profound transformation on multiple levels. The Tudor monarchs, particularly Henry VII and his successors, acutely recognized this imperative and diligently set about forging a new England, one that skillfully balanced cherished tradition with innovative progress, robust power with enduring stability, and boundless ambition with prudent, calculated foresight. One of the most noticeable and impactful shifts was the fundamental change in how the monarchy interacted with the deeply entrenched nobility. The Wars of the Roses had vividly demonstrated just how inherently dangerous a powerful and independent aristocracy could become. Nobles who commanded vast private armies, controlled immense estates, and operated with minimal oversight often pursued their own self-serving interests, which frequently meant audaciously challenging the crown itself. Henry VII, having astutely won the throne by force and strategic marriage, was acutely aware that the stability of his reign depended intimately on rigorously controlling this fractious group. He meticulously introduced policies specifically designed to reduce the pervasive influence of the great lords and to inextricably tie their fortunes more directly to the ultimate success of the monarchy. This comprehensive approach included imposing stringent fines and bonds to keep nobles firmly in line, strategically redistributing lands confiscated from those who rebelled, and assiduously promoting a loyal class of gentry and administrators who owed their elevated status directly to the crown rather than to antiquated hereditary privilege. The Court of Star Chamber emerged as a key and formidable instrument in this policy. It was not merely a legal body but a potent symbol of the new order, where the king's justice was swift, unwavering, and seemingly inescapable. This court was notoriously known for its secrecy and ruthless efficiency, rigorously handling cases of corruption, rebellion, and intricate disputes involving powerful families. By expertly utilizing this powerful tool, the Tudors unequivocally demonstrated that no one, not even the highest-ranking noble, was above the law. While this approach sometimes bred significant resentment among the aristocracy, it proved remarkably effective in preventing the kind of debilitating private wars that had so recently ravaged the kingdom. The financial policies implemented by the Tudor kings also clearly reflected their unwavering desire to stabilize and profoundly strengthen the monarchy. The Wars of the Roses had catastrophically drained the royal treasury, and meticulously rebuilding the economy was absolutely critical. Henry VII was famously frugal and remarkably shrewd, tightening tax collection and diligently rooting out corruption wherever possible. He significantly enhanced customs duties and skillfully utilized the royal courts to reclaim lands and revenues that had slipped from royal control during the tumultuous years of conflict. These concerted efforts yielded significant results, as the crown's income increased dramatically, allowing the Tudors to effectively maintain a standing army, fund governmental reforms, and strategically invest in vital infrastructure. This rigorous fiscal prudence also meant that the monarchy was considerably less dependent on the unpredictable goodwill of Parliament, thereby granting it greater autonomy in governance. Religious transformation under the Tudors was another defining feature of post-war England. Henry VIII's dramatic break with the Catholic Church was not only a spiritual revolution, but a profoundly political one. By establishing the Church of England, with the monarch as its undisputed head, Henry VIII effectively stripped the papacy of its deeply entrenched influence in English affairs. This pivotal shift allowed the crown to confiscate vast church lands and immense wealth, which were then shrewdly used to reward loyal followers and further consolidate royal power. The dissolution of the monasteries, while deeply controversial, served as a clear and unequivocal statement that the old religious order was systematically giving way to a new, more centralized form of authority. This profound religious upheaval had far-reaching social consequences. Many people, especially in rural areas, had relied heavily on monasteries not only for spiritual guidance but also for essential charity, education, and health care. Their abrupt closure severely disrupted established community support systems, leading to widespread unrest in some regions. However, the Tudor monarchs, particularly Elizabeth I, meticulously managed religious tensions by diligently promoting a relatively moderate form of Protestantism. Elizabeth's religious settlement thoughtfully sought to unify the nation under a common church, while strategically tolerating some diversity of belief. This delicate balance played a crucial role in preventing religious conflict from escalating into another devastating civil war, thereby stabilizing England during a critical period of intense nation-building. The social landscape was also significantly shifting beneath the surface. The devastation of the wars and the strategic redistribution of land had undeniably weakened the traditional aristocracy, but concurrently created ample space for the rise of new and influential social groups. The gentry, comprised of wealthy landowners and burgeoning professionals, steadily grew in prominence, diligently serving as local officials, judges, and members of Parliament. This emerging class was often more fiercely loyal to the Tudor crown than to old, established noble families, meticulously aligning their fortunes with the ultimate success of the monarchy. Meanwhile, urban centers rapidly expanded, driven by burgeoning trade and commerce. Cities like London experienced rapid growth, attracting ambitious merchants, skilled artisans, and a burgeoning middle class. This increased social mobility and profound economic diversification significantly helped to modernize England, setting it firmly on a path toward a more complex and dynamic society. Culturally, the Tudor period ushered in a magnificent Renaissance. The pervasive trauma of civil war gave way to an explosive outpouring of artistic and literary expression. The monarchy became avid patrons of the arts, generously sponsoring talented painters, visionary architects, and brilliant playwrights who produced enduring works that celebrated both England's rich, complex history and its hopeful, burgeoning future. William Shakespeare and his brilliant contemporaries drew profound inspiration from the Wars of the Roses, vividly dramatizing the intense power struggles and deeply human dramas of the period in plays that continue to resonate powerfully centuries later. These cultural works effectively helped to forge a coherent national identity, creating a shared narrative that celebrated unity and the invaluable lessons gleaned from history. Internationally, the Tudors confidently expanded England's horizons. Freed from debilitating internal conflict, the country began to engage more aggressively in complex European diplomacy and ambitious exploration. The Tudor navy was significantly strengthened, meticulously paving the way for ambitious overseas expeditions and the eventual establishment of colonies. The decisive defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 under Elizabeth I was a crowning achievement that powerfully symbolized England's emergence as a major European power. These profound developments meticulously laid the groundwork for England's dramatic rise as a formidable global empire in the centuries to come. Despite these remarkable achievements, the haunting legacy of the Wars of the Roses remained a persistent shadow over Tudor England. The inherent dynastic insecurity that had caused so much bloodshed lingered, profoundly influencing royal marriages, meticulous succession planning, and the intricate dynamics of court politics for generations. Henry's multiple marriages and the turbulent succession that followed starkly underscored the fragile nature of the Tudor claim. The eventual transition to the Stuart dynasty in the early 17th century would inevitably reopen old wounds, leading to new conflicts between monarchy and parliament that echoed the struggles of the past. The powerful symbolism of the Wars of the Roses endured in English heraldry and culture. The Tudor rose, skillfully combining the white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster, became a powerful and enduring emblem of reconciliation and profound national unity. This potent symbol served as a constant reminder to the English people of both the horrors of deep division and the inestimable value of hard-won peace, serving as a perpetual reminder of their shared history and the fragile peace that had been so arduously won. Looking back, the Wars of the Roses were a turning point that reshaped England forever. They dismantled the old feudal order and forced the monarchy to evolve into a more centralized and bureaucratic institution. The Tudors' reign marked the beginning of modern English governance, religion, society, and culture. The lessons learned from civil war influenced the development of law, the balance of power, and the very concept of kingship. The story of this era is not just about battles and power struggles. It's about transformation, resilience, and the slow forging of a nation. It's a tale of how a fractured kingdom found unity through change, how ambition met pragmatism, and how the scars of war laid the foundation for peace and progress. The Tudors' legacy is a testament to the enduring strength of England's institutions and the complex, often turbulent path of history itself. The final years of the Wars of the Roses were marked by a combination of fierce battles, shifting allegiances, and moments of unexpected mercy and political cunning. After decades of bloodshed, the land was weary, and the nobility was fragmented, their resources drained, their loyalties fragile. The two houses, Lancaster and York, had been locked in a bitter struggle not only for the throne but for the very identity and future of England. This struggle reached its crescendo in the late 1480s, when Henry Tudor, a relatively obscure claimant with Lancastrian blood, emerged as the figure destined to end the conflict and reshape the nation. Henry Tudor's claim to the throne was tenuous. He was descended through his mother from the Lancastrian line but had spent much of his youth in exile, living in relative obscurity in Brittany and France. His position was precarious, reliant on the support of French nobility and English exiles who still hoped to see the Lancastrians restored. Yet despite these challenges, Henry was a patient and strategic leader. He understood that outright military conquest was only one part of the equation. Winning the loyalty of the English people and nobility was equally vital. The turning point came with the Battle of Bosworth field in 1485, a confrontation that has since become legendary. Richard III, the last Yorkist king, faced Henry Tudor on a misty August day. The battle was brutal and chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Richard fought valiantly, but the tide turned when some of his key allies abandoned him on the battlefield. Betrayed and outnumbered, Richard was killed, marking the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the rise of the Tudors. Henry Tudor was crowned King Henry VII, becoming the first monarch of a new era. Henry's victory was not just military but symbolic. It represented the end of the internecine wars that had torn England apart and the beginning of a new chapter focused on reconciliation and stability. But Henry knew that to secure his reign, he had to carefully navigate the dangerous waters of noble politics. Many Yorkists still held power and influence, and their resentment could easily spark another rebellion. To prevent this, Henry took the unprecedented step of marrying Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV and a symbol of Yorkist legitimacy. This marriage was a masterstroke of political symbolism, uniting the two feuding houses and presenting a united front to the country. The Tudor rose, combining the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, became the emblem of this new unity. It was a potent image that spoke of peace and reconciliation, a visual reminder that the bitter rivalry that had plagued England was now replaced by a hope for lasting peace. Yet, beneath this surface, tensions simmered. The wounds of war ran deep, and the old rivalries did not disappear overnight. Henry's reign was marked by a constant vigilance against plots and uprisings, many of which were orchestrated by surviving Yorkist sympathizers or foreign powers seeking to exploit England's vulnerability. To secure his dynasty, Henry established a network of spies and informants that reached into every corner of the kingdom. He was ruthless in suppressing dissent, using the law to punish those who challenged his authority. The Court of Star Chamber, already established in earlier years, became a key tool for enforcing royal justice. It was feared for its secretive proceedings and harsh punishments, ensuring that no noble could act with impunity. Henry's efforts to consolidate power extended beyond the nobility to the administration of the realm. He reformed the royal finances, strengthened the role of the Privy Council, and improved the efficiency of government. These measures laid the groundwork for the centralized state that would define Tudor England. The social and economic landscape was also transforming during this time. The wars had devastated many regions, depopulated villages, and disrupted traditional agricultural practices. Henry's government encouraged recovery through policies that supported farming, trade, and industry. New laws were introduced to regulate labor and land use, addressing the challenges posed by a changing economy. The rise of the merchant class and the growth of towns began to shift the balance of power away from the landed aristocracy, creating a more complex and dynamic society. Despite Henry's cautious approach, his reign was not without further challenges. Pretenders claiming to be lost princes or heirs to the throne emerged, stirring unrest. The Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck rebellions were notable examples, each posing a significant threat to Tudor stability. These pretenders were often supported by foreign powers or disgruntled nobles, highlighting the fragile nature of Henry's hold on the throne. Yet Henry's combination of diplomacy, military readiness, and political acumen enabled him to overcome these threats and maintain peace. The cultural and religious fabric of England was also shifting in the aftermath of the wars. While Henry VII maintained Catholic orthodoxy, his son Henry VIII would soon bring dramatic religious changes that echoed the transformative spirit of the age. But the Tudor emphasis on central authority and national unity, forged in the crucible of the Wars of the Roses, would continue to shape the religious and political landscape for generations. The legacy of the Wars of the Roses was complex. On one hand, it was a brutal and destructive chapter in English history, marked by betrayal, bloodshed, and uncertainty. On the other, it was a catalyst for profound change. The wars dismantled the medieval feudal order, weakened the power of the great nobles, and paved the way for a more centralized and modern monarchy. The rise of the Tudors symbolized not just a new dynasty but a new way of governing, one that emphasized law, order, and the unity of the nation above factional interests. This period also left an indelible mark on English culture and memory. The stories of the Wars of the Roses, with their dramatic battles, tragic heroes, and shifting fortunes, inspired countless works of literature and art. Shakespeare's history plays brought the characters and conflicts of this era to life, exploring themes of power, legitimacy, ambition, and fate. These cultural representations helped shape the national identity and provided a lens through which later generations would understand their past. As England moved into the Tudor age and beyond, the lessons of the Wars of the Roses remained ever present. The dangers of divided loyalties, unchecked ambition, and political instability were clear. The value of unity, strong governance, and careful diplomacy had been learned through bitter experience. Henry VII's reign, while cautious and sometimes harsh, laid a foundation that allowed England to recover and eventually thrive. The Tudor dynasty would face its own trials and tribulations, from religious upheaval to international conflicts, but the shadow of the Wars of the Roses would always be there, reminding rulers and subjects alike of the fragile nature of peace and the cost of civil war. It was a legacy of blood and betrayal, but also of resilience and renewal. The roses that once symbolized rivalry and destruction had been entwined into a single emblem of hope and unity. Thus, the Wars of the Roses closed not simply as a chapter of conflict, but as the forge in which the future of England was shaped, one marked by lessons learned in fire and blood, tempered by a desire for peace, and driven by the vision of a stronger, united kingdom under the Tudors. The echoes of that tumultuous era would resonate throughout English history, reminding all who came after that even the darkest times can give rise to new beginnings. The Wars of the Roses had finally drawn to a close, but their legacy was far from over. The kingdom that emerged from the ashes was fundamentally transformed, its future shaped by the brutal lessons of decades-long conflict. The conclusion of this dynastic struggle marked not only the end of a bitter chapter but also the birth of a new political and social order that would influence England for centuries to come. Henry Tudor's victory at Bosworth Field was a pivotal moment, yet it was only the beginning of a long process of healing and rebuilding. The scars left by years of civil war ran deep, not just in the landscape, with fields ravaged and towns destroyed, but in the hearts and minds of the English people. Nobles who had fought fiercely against each other now had to learn to coexist, and the common folk had to adapt to the realities of a kingdom striving for peace after so much turmoil. One of the greatest challenges Henry VII faced was securing his own legitimacy. His claim to the throne was weaker than many of his predecessors, derived through a tenuous Lancastrian bloodline and bolstered more by conquest and political acumen than clear hereditary right. This uncertainty lingered in the minds of the nobility and the wider population. Henry knew that to maintain his rule, he needed to unite the fractious nobility under his banner and create a dynasty that could stand the test of time. The marriage between Henry and Elizabeth of York was a carefully crafted symbol of this unity. Their union blended the rival houses of Lancaster and York, promising to heal the wounds of the past. This marriage was more than a personal alliance. It was a political statement, a calculated move to legitimize the Tudor claim and stabilize the monarchy. The emblem of the Tudor rose, combining the red and white roses, became a powerful visual representation of this new era. It served as a constant reminder that the bitter rivalry that had plagued England was now replaced by a hope for lasting peace. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The nobility had been deeply divided, and many Yorkist sympathizers remained resentful of the new regime. The threat of rebellion was never far away. Pretenders like Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck arose, claiming to be rightful heirs to the throne and rallying opposition. These insurrections, though ultimately unsuccessful, highlighted the fragile nature of Tudor authority in its early years. Henry VII had to respond decisively, using a combination of military force, legal measures, and political marriages to quell dissent and strengthen his position. To prevent further noble uprisings, Henry instituted policies that curtailed the power of the great lords. The use of bonds and recognizances, a form of financial surety, ensured that nobles remained loyal, as failure to comply could result in hefty penalties. The Court of Star Chamber became an instrument for enforcing royal justice and controlling aristocratic behavior. These measures gradually eroded the traditional feudal power structures that had enabled the nobility to wage private wars, shifting authority firmly into the hands of the crown. Henry also focused on restoring the royal finances, which had been depleted by years of conflict. Careful management of the treasury and the development of new revenue sources helped stabilize the kingdom's economy. These financial reforms enabled the crown to maintain a standing army and a more professional administration, further consolidating power and reducing the likelihood of future rebellions. The Wars of the Roses also had profound social consequences. The constant fighting had devastated large areas of the country, displaced many families, and disrupted agricultural production. Villages were abandoned, and the population suffered from famine and disease, exacerbated by the instability. In the aftermath, England saw significant changes in land ownership and social structure. The rise of the gentry, wealthy landowners who were not nobles but held significant local influence, altered the traditional hierarchy. These men often supported the Tudor regime, providing a new base of power for the crown. At the same time, the war had accelerated the decline of the medieval chivalric ideal. The brutal realities of the battles, with shifting alliances and betrayals, undermined the romantic notions of knightly honor and loyalty. Warfare became more pragmatic and politically motivated, laying the groundwork for the early modern period's different style of conflict and governance. Culturally, the Wars of the Roses left an enduring imprint. The stories of the conflict, the tragic fates of figures like Richard III and the heroic rise of Henry Tudor, became woven into the fabric of English identity. Shakespeare's history plays immortalized many of these characters and events, exploring timeless themes of power, ambition, and legitimacy. And these dramatizations ensured that the memory of the wars lived on, shaping how future generations understood their history. The political landscape also shifted dramatically. The centralization of power under the Tudors set the stage for the emergence of a strong, unified English state. The monarchy's increased control over the nobility and governance laid the foundations for the administrative reforms that would continue under Henry VIII and beyond. This centralization helped England become more stable and capable of projecting power internally and abroad. Religiously, while Henry VII maintained Catholic orthodoxy, the period set the stage for the seismic changes of the Reformation. The Wars of the Roses had weakened many traditional power centers, including the Church's influence over secular matters. This created an environment in which future monarchs could challenge religious authority, eventually leading to England's break with Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. The legacy of the Wars of the Roses is complex and multifaceted. It was a conflict born of dynastic ambition and factional rivalry, but its effects went far beyond mere battles for the crown. It transformed English society, politics, and culture, breaking down old feudal structures and paving the way for modern governance. It taught harsh lessons about the dangers of divided loyalties and unchecked power, lessons that reverberated throughout English history. The Tudor dynasty, forged in the fires of this civil war, would go on to rule England during a period of significant change and expansion. The stability Henry Tudor worked so hard to achieve allowed England to recover economically, culturally, and politically. His successors built upon this foundation, navigating religious upheaval, exploration, and the early stirrings of empire. In the end, the Wars of the Roses remind us that history is often shaped by struggle and sacrifice. The rose, once a symbol of deadly rivalry, became a sign of unity and hope. The story of this era is not just one of kings and battles, but of a nation learning to heal and move forward. The echoes of this turbulent time continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring power of history to shape identity, politics, and the future. The kingdom that emerged from these wars was forever changed, and the lessons learned would guide the course of English history for centuries. What began as a bitter and bloody contest for the throne ended with the creation of a new order, one that balanced power, sought unity, and laid the groundwork for the rise of a global power. The Wars of the Roses were a crucible in which the England we know today was forged, a reminder that even in the darkest times, renewal and transformation are possible.